It was very deliberate, execution-style homicide.
For a shooter to have emptied their gun, there's a lot of anger, and they wanted her dead.
She was the bright, shining star, and all the men liked to dance with her, and all the men were in love with her.
He's in a romantic relationship with our victim.
He was rude. It seemed like he was put out to have to talk to us.
Could these women have decided, let's get rid of her and we'll each have $50,000?
She called her a whore and a slut, and she was always flirting with her husband.
Hell has no fury like a woman scorned.
It's got square dancing, senior citizens, jealousy, a lot of lies, murder.
This is one for the ages, literally for the old ages.
It doesn't matter if it's teenagers or older. When it comes to jealousy, there's always a breaking point.
Every day in North America, dozens of people are murdered. The key to solving the toughest of these homicides lies in the final 24 hours of the victim's life. To crack the case, detectives must reconstruct that critical timeline. The minutes and hours containing evidence that can help unlock the mystery and catch the killer. The town of Texarkana straddles both Texas and Arkansas. And the quaint, quirky community is a marriage of the best attributes of both states.
It's a neat little town because the main road is state line. So if you're traveling south, you're in Texas, and if you turn around and head north on that road, you're in Arkansas. Where our police department is housed, the state line actually runs through the middle of our building.
In 1991, Bill Clinton declared square dancing as the state folk dance in Arkansas. And so there's a huge square dance community in Texarkana.
Texarkana, Arkansas would be considered to have a lower crime rate than the Texas side, but as a rule, we're really not investigating that many homicides per year.
But on a Tuesday evening, just after Thanksgiving, a 911 call comes in from an affluent neighborhood, shattering the town's usual peace.
About 6 p.m. on December 3rd, Phyllis Neighbors and Barbara Ricketts found a friend that had been shot and was believed to be deceased, so they came for police assistance and help.
When officers arrived on scene, they located the victim who was laying on her front porch.
Heading on the front porch and she's dead.
Who found her?
We came out looking for her. We've been trying to contact her all day. She's been dead since this morning.
Okay, yeah, she's been there a little while.
Officers immediately found gunshot wounds. There was dried blood on her robe, and
a vivacious 59-year-old widow named Patricia Patty Wheelington.
Patty was someone who had a delightful personality. Everyone that met her fell in love with her.
Her husband, Ray, he was very involved in the square dance community. He was a caller for the Guys and Dolls Club, and he got Patty involved in that. After Ray passed away, Patty continued to call the dances. He had left her a large inheritance, and she used that money to be generous with the community, and she was very loved.
Tasked with investigating the murder of Patty Wheelington are detectives Paul Knoll and Jason Hack of the Texarkana Police Department.
This is a very nice, affluent, secluded area. This is not a neighborhood where we have problems.
Each house is really separated. It's going to be a real tough one probably to solve because there's probably not going to be any witnesses.
Her body is positioned with her head toward the door, and she's laying on her back. It appears she's attempted to make it to this door before she falls. There was a chair and coffee cup sitting on a table, and I believe that she was sitting out on the front porch, enjoying a cup of coffee and smoking a cigarette, dressed in a robe because she had just gotten up. I felt like whatever had happened to her, she wasn't expecting it. I don't know how many times she's been shot, but I know that she shot enough that it was fatal.
Whoever did this, it wasn't just random. We do believe that they knew Patty.
It was obvious to us that our victim was pursued by her attacker. This is someone who was determined to kill our victim, who followed her from one side of the porch all the way to the door, and all the while they are continuing to shoot. And I'm thinking this person was someone very close to the victim or someone who had a lot of anger towards the victim.
To find Patty's killer, detectives will need to piece together the final 24 hours of her life.
The blood was dry. It gave the appearance to us that the crime had occurred quite some time earlier.
Lividity had already set in, rigor mortis. It looked like she had been there for numerous hours, most of the day.
Patty's window of death is soon narrowed down when a neighbor comes forward.
Neighbors who lived across the lake from our victim stated that about 8 o'clock that morning, they had heard several gunshots. They didn't call 911 because a lot of individuals that live in that area would constantly fire a gun to try to scare away the geese,
when they heard those shots.
So we know now that Patty was killed at 8 in the morning on December 3rd. So now we're working behind the clock because we're dealing with something that's several hours old.
Investigators begin processing the crime scene.
We observe that there is a bullet hole that is through the back of a chair that's sitting on the front porch. This bullet hole also aligns with the bullet hole that is in the window that went into the residence.
There were pieces of the bathrobe embedded in the chair, and it was pretty clear from the physical evidence that she was sitting in that chair when the first shot was fired.
And it looked like she went from the chair 15, 20 feet across the porch, trying to get to the door, trying to get inside the safety of her home. And at that time, we were able to find, blood trail, and there was another bullet strike against the house. We saw the marks on Patty's face. It's stippling is what it's called.
And that led us to believe that the person who shot Patty was right up on her, so close that the first shot appeared to have been almost a on-contact type wound.
Investigators can determine the distance between the shooter and Patty by the presence of what's known as stippling, small red dots indicating debris and other fragments projected out of a gun barrel. We also see powder burns on her face and lips, suggesting that the gun was essentially in her face, execution style, when the trigger was pulled.
Despite Patty's obvious gunshot wounds and the bullet holes in the house, police don't find any shell casings at the scene.
Either our killer had enough forethought to police their brass and pick it up and take it with them, or they were using a revolver and had no need to pick up the brass. But we do find a projectile that is in the door, and we believe at this point that our victim has been shot with a .38 caliber revolver.
Having processed the scene on the porch, detectives move inside, looking for clues to help them build a narrative of the crime.
Officers entered the house looking for evidence, motive, why did this happen, how did this happen. Patty Willington was an excellent housekeeper. She had valuables within the house, jewelry, she had money, TVs, electronics. Nothing was touched.
It wasn't a robbery. There were no locks, no doors busted. It didn't look like anybody had made it to the home.
But there's one detail that catches the detective's attention.
We observe a receipt, and this receipt is for a locksmith. This was something very instrumental in our investigation, because it is not every day that someone changes the locks on their home.
A locksmith had come out for December 2nd and it appeared to put brand new locks on the home the day before the homicide. So that gave us some concern that she's probably had some problems with someone.
We're close that it is entirely possible that they may have a key to her residence. And we're going to find out who she's trying to keep out.
Continuing their search, detectives make a second discovery.
Also laying out, we found a life insurance policy on the counter. The life insurance policy was for $100,000, and each person named on that policy was getting $20,000. So you're looking at that saying, do we have our killer, their name on this page?
Life insurance proceeds sometimes can be the cause or the motive of a murder. So immediately the officers looked at that policy and who were the beneficiaries. It happened to include Barbara Ricketts and Phyllis Neighbors.
Detectives must now consider the possibility that Phyllis and Barbara didn't just discover the crime scene. Perhaps they created it.
Was Patty Willington killed for this money? Could these women have decided, let's get rid of her and we'll each have $20,000 to show for it?
We don't think that women are violent because women are supposed to be nurturing and not aggressive, but an elderly or older perpetrator shatters your stereotypes of the kind, nurturing little old grandmother. This takes this case to a whole new level.
brutal shooting of 59-year-old Patty Wheelington. Detectives have their sights on the two women who reported her murder. Phyllis Neighbors and Barbara Ricketts.
Phyllis and Barbara are two women who were members of the Guys and Dolls Square Dancing Club, and they were also really good friends of Patty Wheelington's.
When we're responding to something such as a homicide, number one, we trust no one. Phyllis and Barbara had something to gain from the life insurance policy.
And it's not uncommon for a suspect to have called police and asked for help. They do that to throw the police off. Those are the people we have to check their alibis and check their whereabouts.
Investigators bring Phyllis and Barbara down to the station to be questioned.
There's got to be a reason why this person was killed. Was this money that important to them? Did they do something to speed up the process?
And so we just plainly asked Phyllis, were you aware that you were a beneficiary in Patty's life insurance policy?
The friends had been gathered one evening at Patty's home, and they were all playing cards together, and that Patty had said she wanted to leave each of them $20,000.
Whenever Patty was telling them that they were on the life insurance policy, they kind of joked it off because Patty was really one of the youngest members of the club.
They were all just like, Patty, there's no way that we're going to outlive you because we're all older than you are. That's just never going to happen. When Phyllis was confronted with the fact that they were going to benefit from their questions from detectives, that might lead you to think, oh my gosh, they think maybe I did it.
Those are the hard questions, but we ask them.
Detectives pivot the course of their questioning to Phyllis's timeline in the hours leading up to Patty's murder.
The night of December 2nd, Phyllis was at bingo at the dance hall with their friend Virginia Hyatt. Patty walks into the dance hall. She's by herself, but she just decided to go home after that. She just left. Patty did.
On December 3rd, Phyllis got up that morning about 8 o'clock.
Just after 10, she had attempted to contact Patty by text message. She informed us that she did not get a response from Patty. She assumed that Patty was still sleeping. Around 10:15, Phyllis says that her friend Virginia Hyatt came to her residence and they sat down and watched The Price is Right. And after the show was over, Virginia wound up leaving and Phyllis went on about her day. Phyllis informed us that the reason they responded at the scene is that they were contacted by Ken Caldwell, an older gentleman, and Patty would pick him up and take him to doctor's appointments. Phyllis was contacted by Ken at 3:30. Ken was informing her that he had been trying to contact Patty throughout the day and that he was very concerned about her.
With nobody to corroborate Phyllis's alibi of being at home alone during the time that Patty was murdered, detectives turned to Barbara Ricketts to see how well their stories match.
Like Phyllis, Barbara had met Patty through the Square Dance Club. They hit it off, they became friends, and would communicate back and forth throughout the week.
Detectives asked if Barbara Ricketts knew that they were beneficiaries on this policy, and Barbara Ricketts replied that yes, we know that we're beneficiaries. We kind of laughed it off at the time.
Then we looked into Barbara's alibi as we did Phyllis's.
Miss Ricketts states that she was home all day with her husband and never went anywhere.
Her husband, Charles, he was also able to confirm that Barbara was at home throughout that time. We were confident that her alibi was solid. Phyllis was also someone who we didn't find discrepancy in her story.
Everything they told us matched. Everything was consistent, so we were able to pretty much rule them out.
Looking to drum up new leads, investigators turned to Patty's autopsy results.
We learned from Patty's autopsy that she had been shot 5 times. It also confirmed that we're looking for a .38 caliber revolver, which was consistent with what we had learned from projectiles that were collected at the scene.
Of the 5 shots, 3 were fatal shots to her heart and her up when she was shot. The autopsy confirms that. It was close proximity, almost like execution style. She was shot 5 times. For lack of a better term, that's overkill. That's not something that happens in every homicide.
This type of revolver would have only held 5 bullets. For our shooter to have emptied their gun on Patty, they wanted her dead. They weren't trying to hurt her, they were trying to kill her.
The fact that Patty was shot 5 times at close range suggests to me that this was a committed and ambitious killer. Somebody who had a very strong motive to ensure that she was dead.
Having established that Patty likely knew her killer, detectives dig into her background, looking for anyone who may have had a grudge against her.
Barbara and Phyllis continually stated over and over again that Patty had no enemies. There was no one that she had problems with. Everyone that met her fell in love with her. She cared about others. A lot of people admired her. They've described her as the belle of the ball.
She's younger, she's attractive, the men are attracted to her. At this point, we're thinking that maybe if a scorned lover killed Patty.
Patty was a bright, shining star at the Guys and Dolls Club, and all the men liked to dance with her, and all the men were in love with her.
So who could it have been? Those detectives had their hands full because they had a bunch of dirty old men to look at as suspects.
In the execution-style murder of wealthy widow Patty Wheelington, detectives are searching for a scorned lover amongst members of a senior square dancing club.
Whatever happened, there was a lot of emotion for her to be murdered at close range. This was a passion murder. Who was she dating? Who was she seeing? Was there jealousy?
Working the theory that a jilted lover might be Patty's killer, investigators push her friends to single out one suitor that Patty rebuffed.
One of the names we were given was Ken Caldwell. Patty was supposed to take Ken Caldwell to an appointment on December 3rd in the afternoon, and she didn't make that appointment.
Miss Ricketts and Miss Neighbors mentioned that he's in love with her. He always has been.
But I think a lot of people suspected that maybe Patty was involved with some of these men. And there were definitely rumors about her and Ken.
We have to look at Ken because maybe he's called Barbara and Phyllis and trying to cover his tracks.
Detectives bring Ken Caldwell down to the station for questioning.
We find out that Ken is on up in years. He's in his 90s.
Ken describes his relationship with Patty as a very close relationship. She made sure he had groceries. She got his medications for him.
She drove him around quite frequently. They talked on the phone, I think, at least once a day. He really became
Patty. He had called Patty at like 7:57 a.m. on December 3rd.
And at this point, someone drives up Patty's driveway, and Patty tells Ken, "Listen, I've got to go. I will call you back."
Seeking evidence to support or refute Ken's alibi, that he was at home talking to Patty, detectives turn to the phone records.
We were able to determine that about 7:57 in the morning on December 3rd, that Patty did in fact have a conversation with Ken Caldwell.
They're also able to establish through the phone records this phone call from Ken Caldwell was from a landline, so he had to be at his house to make that phone call. And so they can verify his story as true.
I've already established from the neighbors that the gunshots they heard were around 8 o'clock. Ken's talking to her just before 8 o'clock. So we believe that Ken is on the phone with Patty when the murderer is coming to her home.
While phone records eliminate Ken Caldwell as a suspect, they also provide investigators with new leads.
There's someone that Patty is communicating with, and they are listed in the phone as simply MF. And it was an almost daily thing that she would communicate with him.
There were no other contacts listed by codes, numbers, initials. It was first and last name throughout her contact list. So why is this person disguised as initials?
We surmised from the records that this MF was a romantic connection to Patty. So it's a person of interest.
As they're going through the calls from MF, they see contact between Patty and MF at 7:17 the morning she was murdered. And this was a cell phone, so the person could be anywhere when they made that call.
To find out who the mystery number belongs to, detectives line up members of the Guys and Dolls Square Dance Club that was the center of Patty's active social life.
But no one knows who MF is. No one.
This was very puzzling to investigators. Why was there a secret contact in her phone? Was she leading a separate life? Was this person someone who was jealous? Was this person have a reason to kill Patty? We don't know who this person is, what they're capable of, and we don't know what happened between this person and Patty immediately before she was killed.
It also tells that this is is a secret that might involve somebody at the club. Maybe MF is married and has a wife, and it leads to a problem.
Now working the theory that Patty could be having an affair with a married man, detectives shift their line of questioning.
There's some specific rumors that start to surface about Patty's relationship with James Hyatt of the Guys and Dolls Club.
He is married. Maybe Patty's life insurance policy.
Just like anyone else who was on this life insurance policy, stood to gain something from Patty being killed.
They take that phone number associated with MF and get a subpoena and find that it belongs to a James Hyatt.
We realize at this point that James has two phones. He has one phone that is listed as James Hyatt, and then he has another phone which it appears he is using frequently to contact and to talk with Patty. We're thinking at this point that there is romantic involvement between Patty and James Hyatt.
You have the fact that this person called her at 7:17 in the morning. He communicates with her hundreds of times. So maybe something has gone wrong with this relationship. He's married, and now James Hyatt is our number one suspect. But we can't get in touch with James. We can't get anybody to answer the phone. That's another smoking gun for us. Why wouldn't you want to talk to us? We talked to the club and we learned that James hasn't been around since like November 29th. No one has seen or heard really from James Hyatt.
There was a rumor that on November the 29th of 2013, James Hyatt was filing for divorce from Virginia Hyatt after a lifelong marriage. There had also been a rumor when James suddenly disappeared that maybe he and Patty had run off together. Some people didn't believe it, some people did.
But Patty came back that Sunday night before the murder, and James did not come back in town.
At the Guys and Dolls Dance Club, there were always seemed to be these rumors and gossip. I think the participants found that almost as fun as the dancing, maybe, like gossipy teenagers. They would whisper to each other about each other. It reminded me so much of junior high school.
To the extent that they're hearing all of these rumors, police investigators need to follow through, and that may, in fact, be a rumor or a conjecture. And sometimes they're nothing more than red herrings. Unfortunately, police officers have no choice but to investigate, because some savvy defense lawyer will come down the line and create a hole in their investigation that may very well derail the prosecution.
Recalling that Patty's close friend Phyllis mentioned James's wife Virginia as part of her alibi, investigators circle back to Phyllis to find out what she knows about the Hyatts.
The night of December 2nd, Virginia was at bingo at the dance hall with Phyllis, and Virginia was pretty distraught because James has filed for divorce. He's packed some things, he's left, she doesn't know where he is. She is telling Phyllis that she thinks that James has run off with Patty.
For detectives, this confirms the rumors that James and Virginia were on the rocks, and that his relationship with Patty might play into that drama.
Phyllis attempted to call James Hyatt after they discovered that Patty had been killed.
Answers the phone. He seems irritated.
Phyllis informs James at this point that Patty's been killed, and James's response is, "I can't talk right now," and he hangs up. It's troubling when you know that there's a romantic involvement, and then you have someone who could coldly just say, "I can't talk right now," and hang up. It certainly raised questions. It made me wonder what type of person is James. James is in a romantic relationship with our victim. He called our victim earlier the morning that she was killed. There's potential he would have had a key to her residence, and now we know that James is a beneficiary on the life insurance. He absolutely made a very good suspect.
In the cold-blooded murder of Patty Wheelington, detectives speculate that her married lover, James Hyatt, could have killed her in a crime of passion.
Is he leaving his wife for Patty, and is Patty to blame? Did he tell Patty, "I'm leaving Virginia for you," and then Patty tells him, "No, that's the relationship I want"? But he moves to the front of the line as far as a suspect because this person was very angry when they killed Patty. Plus, he stands to get money for her death.
Having established a motive, investigators need to determine whether James had the opportunity to commit the murder.
Investigators are told that he was in Florida with his sisters because he had to get out of town, and he wasn't very forthcoming.
Reluctantly, James agrees to return to Arkansas for a formal interview.
I was very put off by his demeanor. He came off to me as arrogant. The majority of the people we talked to, they realize their role is to help us bring to a resolution this crime that has occurred to their loved one. That wasn't James.
He was rude. It seemed like he was put out to have to talk to us.
Investigators drill down on how James knows Patty.
James explained that he was friends with Ray and Patty for many years. James Hyatt and his wife Virginia would go on double dates with Patty and Ray. They square danced together, and then when Ray got sick, he was there to help Patty with the needs around the house. He swore that they were just friends.
Investigators confront James with the rumors he and Patty were having an affair.
James denies that there is anything inappropriate going on between he and Patty Willington. He's pretty adamant about it. Those were just rumors. His wife was jealous, and it was just something that she thought up in her head, and there's nothing to it.
We produced messages between Patty and James, and as the saying goes, we held his feet to the fire. Then he admitted that he had been seeing her romantically.
Anybody ever met her from lovely? So her eyes just sparkled. Patty told me, "Don't you leave Virginia over me. Don't you ever do that." I said, "Patty, we can't leave her. She can't cope on her own. I still have to take care of her." And she said, "Okay, I can understand that."
But James adamantly refutes the rumors that he and Patty went away together 3 days before her murder.
James Hyatt said Patty had gone to stay with some friends for a few days for the Thanksgiving holiday, and then suddenly James files for divorce November the 29th and leaves Texarkana, but James said it was just coincidence.
Detectives turn to phone records to see if James's alibi of being out of town holds up.
We confirmed that James is actually in Florida. He was near the crime scene at the time of the murder.
With James no longer a person of interest, investigators shift gears, pushing him for information about his marriage to Virginia.
He and Virginia had been married for 41 years. He said it wasn't a good marriage and basically stated they had nothing in common. The only thing they did together was go to the square dance club.
James said that they were all friends, but this affair rose a lot of problems between he and his wife, Virginia.
After Ray passed away, Virginia's jealousy seemed to increase, and that their relationship started to deteriorate.
Virginia was very jealous of James ever dancing with Patty. Virginia would make snide remarks or catty remarks towards Patty, say little gossipy things about her.
Virginia wasn't polished or sophisticated. She wasn't stylish like Patty, and she was very possessive of her husband, James Hyatt.
Virginia surmises that there's an affair, and that is when Virginia's behavior became erratic. She's driving all around town, going to different motels, looking for James's car or Patty's car because she was convinced that they were shacked up at a hotel somewhere.
Detectives press James for details on Virginia's behavior in the lead up to Patty's murder.
She's getting worse and worse and worse with her possessiveness. I made up my mind then I'm leaving Virginia. I filed for divorce. I'm not going to have you serve her papers until I'm safely out of town.
James left town on November 29th, and Virginia was in a panic. And then Virginia went to Patty Willington's house on December 2nd and was convinced that James was at her house. She was begging and pleading for James to come out and for Patty to give her husband back, and Patty said he's not here.
Patty had to call James on the phone and put Virginia on the phone with James before she would calm down enough that she would leave. This was the day prior to Patty being killed.
James did have keys for Patty's house, and Virginia might have had the possibility of getting a copy of the key.
That's why I called Patty on Monday, and I was on the phone with her when the locks were changed on her house.
The person that Patty was trying to keep out of her home was Virginia Hyatt.
And I told Patty she's coming back. I said she's not going to give it up here. That was the last time I talked to her.
Detectives ask if James or his wife have any firearms in the house.
James stated that he had a .38 caliber revolver that went missing when he and his wife moved from out in the country to town. If the bullets that were found could be matched to a .38 caliber bullet and fired from a .38 caliber revolver. Then we have the murder weapon.
And James tells us can actually shoot better than him, and she's quite a good shot.
And at this point, we have one name that comes up that has a problem with our victim. The only problem that Patty had with anyone in her life was with Virginia Hyatt.
Now, Virginia is being looked at as a prime suspect, and officers are asking questions about Virginia. Who is she? What kind of person is she? And is she capable of committing this horrendous crime?
In the homicide investigation of beloved square dance cure, Patty Wheelington, detectives have a new suspect. Her lover, James Hyatt's wife, Virginia.
When you think of a conventional killer shooting somebody at point-blank range 5 times, Virginia Hyatt doesn't come to mind. But again, whether it's the sordid underworld of seniors square dancing or rivalries within some criminal organization, people's genuine hardwiring always comes to the surface.
Virginia's world was crumbling. The night of December 2nd, Virginia was at bingo, telling Phyllis that she thinks that James has run off with Patty. Well, there's Patty. She's by herself. James is not there. So it leads to this don't steal my husband kind of confrontation.
And then Virginia takes one of James's shirts and throws it at Patty in front of everyone and said, you're going to see him before I do, so be sure to give him his shirt back.
Virginia blamed Patty for the demise of her relationship with James Hyatt. Patty was very shaken, like literally shaking, and just not used to that kind of, interpersonal drama in her life, and she found it extremely disturbing.
It doesn't matter if it's teenagers, middle age, or older, that when it comes to jealousy, there's always a breaking point.
Detectives know Patty was murdered at 8 a.m., more than 2 hours before Virginia
Up that morning, at least until 10:15, where we knew that she arrived at Phyllis's house to watch The Price is Right.
With Virginia Hyatt in their crosshairs, detectives haul her into the station for questioning.
She comes across like my grandmother. She's slow to walk, so that's the appearance she gives, that she's not capable of doing this crime.
She also doesn't appear to be upset at all.
Detectives start by asking Virginia about her relationship with Patty.
Virginia says that she and Patty are good friends, they're close friends.
The Patty lady. You had any problems with her?
Oh, she's all nice.
Is she nice to you?
Yeah.
Once we confront Virginia, we know that James has had a relationship with Patty. She finally acknowledges that she knew, but she's okay with it.
Virginia stated, as long as he comes home to me, I'll share him, but she still called her a whore and a slut, but she denied killing Patty.
And you've been very upset at Patty.
But I didn't do this. You write it down.
Virginia telling us that she's okay with sharing James didn't match her not wanting him to dance with people and her being upset about that. She wanted James herself, and she believed Patty was a homewrecker.
Detectives press Virginia for her timeline at 8 a.m. on December 3rd, when Patty was killed.
She tells investigators that at 8 a.m. she went to McDonald's to get a sausage biscuit for her mother, who was in a nursing home. After getting the sausage biscuit from McDonald's, she then takes it to her mother at the nursing home, and she gets there about 8:20.
She stayed and visited with her mother, and then she didn't leave there till sometime between 9:30 and maybe 10 o'clock.
And then after that, she drove to her friend Phyllis' neighbor's house and got there about 10:15, and that's when they watched The Price is Right.
Tuesday morning, somebody goes out there and shoots Patty.
But I would do it, and I know lots and lots of people. At the nursing home, these people all see me.
We asked Virginia if she has a gun or shot a gun, and she says no.
Don't have one registered to you. More reason than that.
I don't think so.
A little 38. When was the last time you saw that?
Long time.
Can you shoot a gun?
I ain't shot a gun in 30 years.
You ain't shot no gun?
Detectives keep Virginia in custody while they verify her alibi.
The first thing the investigators do is go to the nursing home, and they asked if they had any security cameras because Virginia had already told investigators that she went to the nursing home by 8:20. The video shows Virginia Hyatt walking into the nursing home at 9:42 a.m., and then she walks out 12 minutes later at 9:54.
Virginia's lying about the time that she arrived at the nursing home, so what else has she lied about?
She tells investigators she went to McDonald's at 8, so investigators then collect the video from McDonald's. at 8 o'clock like she says, but at 9:30.
Her alibi was not checking out. Virginia had time and opportunity to have committed this crime. This is our killer. How do we put her at the residence?
We're also able to get some video footage from a convenience store that's on Highway 82. If you were to drive from Virginia's house to Patty's house, it's the direct route. Virginia's vehicle at 7:53 a.m. is traveling out of town on Highway 82 to Patty Wheelington's house. And then at 8:16 a.m., we see that same vehicle coming back into town from Patty's house.
With circumstantial evidence mounting against Virginia, detectives obtain a warrant to search her home.
As we're searching the house, we found a box of .38 ammunition that matched what was used to murder Patty. And then we also found clothes matching what video coverage we had.
And so they collect those items of clothing and send it to the Arkansas State Crime Lab to be tested for gunshot residue. And they had positive results. That shirt was in close proximity to a gun firing, and the residue landed on the shirt.
It's definitely the smoking gun.
With this final piece of the puzzle, detectives can now reconstruct Patty Wheelington's final 24 hours.
On December 2nd, 2013, Virginia's distraught. She hasn't seen her husband for 3 days.
Oh, God!
So she confronts Patty. Jealousy just took over, and I think she didn't see any other way to fix it other than getting rid of the problem, which was Patty Wheelington. On December 3rd, Patty gets up. She has her morning coffee. She receives a phone call from her friend Ken Caldwell, 7:57 a.m.
Virginia arrived at Patty Wheelington's house at 7:58.
Patty tells Ken someone's there. She has to hang up.
Patty was taken by surprise when Virginia pulled a gun out. Virginia pulls the trigger, sending the first round through Patty's chest area, through the back of the chair, through the window.
She gets up and runs for her life, and as she does, Virginia just continues to shoot her 4 more times, killing Patty.
The old adage, hell has no fury like a woman scorned, also comes to mind. And it's just, I think, a reminder of how much jealousy can expand exponentially into violence. We call that a pathological jealousy. And in this case, Virginia is frantically out to seek revenge and destroy Patty.
Virginia Hyatt is found guilty of capital murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
I do feel that justice was served, but to me this has always been one of those sad cases because her husband leaving her for this woman. That's something you may entertain with younger women, but you wouldn't expect it from women of this age.
This case was one for the ages, and literally for the ages, for the old ages. It's not a case that we've ever had, and I'm hoping it's the case I never have again. Patty's friends are robbed of her friendship and of the things that she did for them and the time she spent with them, and so it affected a lot of people.
Patty was a loving person and a thoughtful and caring friend, and that's just a huge loss for this community.
Patty Wheelington will be remembered as somebody who brought people together and had a positive impact, and I believe her legacy will live on in that way.
They watch these two men force Mr. Stark into the Dodge Caravan and drive off with him into the night.
He was a successful real estate businessman and respected member of the Hasidic community.
Mr. Stark owed $40 million to his business dealings.
He roped up the rest of his family members in, and it went horribly wrong.
If you can't get approved for a conventional bank loan, your next best choice probably shouldn't be the mob.
They'll send a couple of goons to your house and make you pay.
This guy's very nervous. He knows something.
Every day in North America, dozens of people are murdered. The key to solving the toughest of these homicides lies in the final 24 hours of the victim's life. To crack the case, detectives must reconstruct that critical timeline. The minutes and hours containing evidence that can help unlock the mystery and catch the killer. Williamsburg, Brooklyn. A vibrant neighborhood in New York City, where modern style blends with old world charm.
Williamsburg, in the last 15, 20 years, has become very gentrified. It's a melting pot of all different types of communities.
The community of Williamsburg is also heavily Hasidic. They're very traditional, very tight-knit community.
People that work in the stores are Hasidic. The bus drivers, the mechanics, it's sort of a all-inclusive neighborhood.
The area of Williamsburg itself is a pretty safe area. You have the occasional robberies, burglaries, but murders, very rarely. It's not the worst area in Brooklyn.
On a cold winter's night, the 90th Precinct gets an alarming call about a member of the Hasidic community.
The 911 call was made by a Hasidic woman. She had called in concern that her husband did not arrive home, which is unlike him. He always came home the time that he said.
The night of January 2nd into the early morning hours of January 3rd, the snow was coming down. It was a blizzard. So when he didn't come home at the time she expected him, she was very afraid for her husband's safety.
The missing man is 39-year-old Menachem Stark, a prominent member of Williamsburg's Hasidic community.
Mr. Stark was a Marysburg neighborhood of Brooklyn. He was the owner of many buildings. He had many tenants. He was very beloved by his family and friends, and his life was really about his community and his family.
Police are dispatched to Menachem Stark's last known whereabouts, his office on Rutledge Street.
His brother Al was at the office where Menachem was supposed to be and explained to us that Menachem was not there. But Menachem's car was still at the location, and nothing there seemed to be out of place.
When detectives watch video surveillance from the cameras in his office building, they were able to see that something was wrong.
Shortly after 11:40 p.m., Menachem can be seen exiting his office and being jumped by two large men.
The video is grainy, it's dark, so it's tough to make out faces. We can't see faces on there at all.
Detectives still see Menachem Stark leaving his office, and a figure gets out of the Dodge Caravan that's sitting parked outside. That person approaches him, seems to engage Mr. Stark in some kind of a conversation, and immediately you see that figure start wrestling Mr. Stark to the ground. And then a second figure comes out of the Dodge Caravan, runs over to Mr. Stark and starts helping the first figure get control of Mr. Stark. And Mr. Stark was fighting for his life in that moment.
So after about 4 minutes, the two individuals are successful in getting Mr. Stark into their vehicle, and then the van drives off.
For investigators seeing this video, right away they know that Mr. Stark has been kidnapped. I mean, there's no mistaking that.
Tasked with investigating the kidnapping of Menachem Stark are detectives Matt Collins and Chris Scarry of Brooklyn's 90th Precinct.
Even if the kidnapper's intention is to hold this person and get payment in some way, kidnapping is by definition violent, and so additional violence could be perpetrated in order to control your victim and obtain what you want. Plus, if it doesn't go according to plan, now you have a witness who may be able to identify yourself and your accomplices as the kidnappers.
This incident now ramps up our efforts. We must find Mr. Stark in a timely manner.
To find Menachem Stark, investigators will need to reconstruct the 24 hours leading up to the businessman's kidnapping.
Because the video was very grainy, we were unable to see any type of license plate from the vehicle that Mr. Stark was put in.
The area is an industrial zone. There's no witnesses in the area at that time.
We found some duct tape out in front of the location. We were able to take possession of and go further from there.
Racing against the clock to find Menachem Stark alive, detectives move quickly to interview his wife, Bashi, to learn more about Menachem's activities before his kidnapping.
When we went to go speak with Mr. Stark's wife, she had 7 children in the apartment with her. She was extremely concerned.
Bashi Stark knew when to expect her husband home. Mr. Stark was a family man. He had a lot of responsibilities. but she always knew where he was going to be.
Vashi had spoken to Malcolm at about 8:42 that evening and asked him what time he might be home. He had told her he had some business to tend to, and he was thinking somewhere about 11:30.
We asked, is this normal for him to go to office at 11:30 at night on a Thursday was? And she's like, no, it was normal. He'd go there for a half hour and then he'll return home.
But that evening, after 11:30 had passed, Vashi became concerned and called Menachem's phone at about 11:40. And Menachem did not pick up his phone, which was unusual for him. She waited a short time longer, and she called Menachem's number again at 12 o'clock. The phone was picked up, but there was no answer, and then hung up, which was highly unusual. This is what Vashi became very, very concerned about.
Investigators turned to Menachem Stark's cell phone records, hoping they'll be able to pinpoint his location.
They're able to get location information for Mr. Stark at certain times throughout the night that he was using his cell phone. And so they were able to actually see throughout the night when Mr. Stark was exactly where his wife thought he was, and that was at his office.
Mr. Stark's phone records revealed that after Vashi had made that phone call to Menachem's phone, about midnight, his phone was moving. And it moved from his office, headed southbound, leaving Brooklyn. And after about 12, the phone had been disabled at that time.
With Menachem's trail going cold shortly after midnight, detectives redouble their efforts to track him down. Then, they receive an unexpected lead from another New York police department.
On January 3rd, out in Great Neck, Long Island, a gas station attendant comes into work and sees that there is smoke coming out of a dumpster. He gets close to the dumpster and he smells something very, very bad, and he immediately calls 911. The fire department arrives, the police arrive, and they open up the dumpster, and they see the badly burned body of a man. His hands are tied, there's duct tape wrapped around him.
The body is found still burning and smoldering. It was more burning from the mid part of the body down, but you can still notice a face.
The man who was found in the dumpster at that gas station is identified as being Menachem Stark.
This is the worst case scenario in kidnapping cases where the person kidnapped is killed.
With the body identified as Menachem Stark, investigators from the 90th Precinct are now dealing with a homicide.
In this case, the body is dumped and set on fire, so it's very shocking and jarring. I think it speaks for a callous disregard for life. Most kidnappings are committed by acquaintances, so these killers likely don't have a strong personal connection with the victim.
Investigators work to establish a time frame for Menachem Stark's murder.
Mr. Stark had been kidnapped around 11:40 p.m. from Williamsburg. And from the gas station attendant out in Great Neck, Long Island, they knew that that dumpster was full of smoke early in the morning, probably sometime just after 7 a.m.
So now we have a window of about 11:40 at night when Mr. Stark was taken in a van. And then the next morning, January the 3rd, when they saw there was smoke coming out of the dumpster.
So for investigators, it's now their job to figure out, well, who was driving the van that night and who did this to Mr. Stark?
Looking for answers, investigators turn to the autopsy results.
When the medical examiner examines Mr. Stark's body, he determines that the cause of death was compression asphyxiation, or in laypeople's terms, someone put so much pressure on Mr. Stark's chest that he couldn't breathe and he suffocated.
What we had at that point was there were at least 2 people involved with this kidnapping/homicide case, but we still were not aware of the motivation behind why Menachem was killed.
In the abduction and murder of Hasidic businessman Menachem Stark, detectives from the 90th Precinct are searching for 2 suspects, seen on video surveillance pulling him into a van the night he disappeared.
We have to find out the motivation behind what was happening here. And at that very moment, we didn't know what that was and who might have done this to Mr. Stark.
For the traditional tight-knit community, Menachem Stark's brutal death is a devastating loss.
The funeral procession of Menachem Stark was very touching and impressive.
Mr. Stark was a very generous man in the community. He was very well known and well respected. We were devastated by the news also.
The family obviously was very, shook into the core that somebody would do this to one of their family members. They were scared, and they certainly wanted us to do everything we could to get the people responsible for that.
Having determined that Menachem was likely killed by the two men seen on video grabbing him off the street, investigators dig into his real estate business, looking for potential suspects.
We had discovered a check that Menachem had made out to the construction company owned by Thomas Falcone for approximately $20,000 that had bounced.
Thomas Falcone is a contractor. He's the head contractor that Mr. Stark does business with. Mr. Stark would buy a building that needed work to be done, so he had to bring a contractor in to fix up the building. This was Mr. Falcone.
Detectives track down Thomas Falcone and bring him in for an interview.
Mr. Falcone had been doing many projects for Mr. Stark and had a fairly good business relationship until recently.
There was times where Mr. Stark could not pay Mr. Falcone the money that was needed for Mr. Falcone to pay his employees. So that became heated, where at the point where Mr. Falcone would have to go to Mr. Stark's office and demand to be paid.
Detectives continue to question Mr. Falcone about the tensions in their relationship, but he's not forthcoming.
I would say he was a little bit arrogant. He hid a lot of information from us during the investigation. So we were kind of getting more and more suspicious about what was going on with Mr. Falcone.
I asked him about his whereabouts when this incident took place, and Mr. Falcone indicated to me that he had been at a construction site on Long Island all day, and then about 6 o'clock he rode back to his residence, which was in Queens, and was home with his family at his house for the rest of the night. We were able to confirm that, in fact, that's what happened as far as his whereabouts at the time of the crime.
With no solid suspect emerging, detectives do a deep dive into Menachem Stark's business, looking for new leads.
Menachem was a real estate person in Brooklyn. We know that that's a very competitive, cutthroat type business. But as we got more into his financial background, we realized that he and his company were facing shortage of cash and some bankruptcies.
He owes a substantial amount of money to many people. We find in the course of this investigation that Mr. Stark owed nearly dealings.
He had to borrow a lot of money from banks and from other people to cover debts.
One of the motivations of a homicide is, in fact, financial motivations behind the killing. So finding out that Mr. Stark wasn't as financially sound as maybe people thought he was definitely a path to look down involving his death.
Investigators then learn that Menachem Stark has a business partner named Israel Perlmutter. They speak with him down at the station, hoping he'll provide more information about their financial dealings.
Mr. Perlmutter is a big shot of the community. He's a person that Mr. Stark would go to regarding financial situations. Mr. Stark needed a certain amount of money in a bank account at a certain time for a check to clear. He would ask Mr. Perlmutter, who would put money into the bank account.
Mr. Perlmutter told us that he had some type of dispute with Mr. Stark about money. Some of the money might have been missing along the way, and that Menachem didn't give him a good enough answer to why this happened.
He's like, listen, if somebody took $300,000 out of your account, wouldn't you be upset? But he also tells us that they've both taken money out of the bank account to pay for, family things or to pay off certain debts.
As investigators continue questioning Mr. Perlmutter, his behavior begins to raise suspicion.
One of the things in my mind when I was speaking to him was that he was a bit elusive with me and a bit standoffish, which as an investigator start to ring some bells in your head. We weren't sure if this is somebody that we should be interested in, or is this somebody that is just nervous with the police. But during the course of the interview, we were able to verify his whereabouts at the time of the crime.
Mr. Perlmutter was home with his family on the night of Menachem's abduction and murder. With his alibi confirmed, detectives ask him about a key detail they've uncovered.
During the course of our investigation, we find that Mr. Stark had deposited $200,000 into a business account just days before his kidnapping and murder. When I spoke to Mr. Perlmutter about it, again, he became elusive with me as to where this money actually came from. We were hearing the nexus of this money potentially was the alleged Russian mob. It becomes concerning. Was this something that organized crime may have been involved with as far as killing Mr. Stark?
Mr. Perlmutter, he was defaulting on, and he was part of those loans, and if this had something to do with why Menachem was killed, then he might be next.
If Menachem Stark wasn't paying the money back in a timely fashion, this could be a motivating factor of why this happened.
If you go to Citibank and you borrow $100,000 from them and you can't pay, they usually send you a nasty letter. When you borrow money from the street and you don't pay them back, they'll send a couple of goons to your house and break your legs or break your arm and make you pay.
The Russian mob has their own set of rules, so if they have to get paid back, they're going to make sure they get their money back. This could be what happened to Mr. Stark.
In the abduction and killing of Menachem Stark, detectives have learned the loving father and Brooklyn businessman was over $40 million in debt and may have owed money to the Russian mob.
As investigators, the alarms go off in our heads, especially when you start hearing of money coming from potentially a Russian mobster. Mr. Stark's business partner, Israel Perlmutter, I'm sure he was elusive with me because he knew that borrowing money from people in organized crime was a very bad business mistake. Mr. Perlmutter indicated to me that he was very frightened at this time and concerned about his well-being.
I think it goes without saying that if you can't get approved for a conventional bank loan, your next best choice probably shouldn't be the mob. Borrowing a couple $100,000 from the Russian mafia in New York City, in terms of repayment plans, there's obviously significant personal risk attached to defaulting on that loan.
To pay back their debt to the Russian mob, Mr. Perlmutter reveals he and Menachem turned to a loan shark named Abe Hoffman.
Mr. Hoffman is somebody that people turn to get out of some type of trouble. Hence the term loan shark. Menachem had gone to Mr. Hoffman and borrowed $500,000 to cover the money that was allegedly borrowed from a Russian mob figure from Brooklyn. We spoke with Mr. Hoffman, and he had told us that he had known Menachem for many, many years, had done business with Menachem many times, and had no issues dealing with him.
So Mr. Hoffman deposited $500,000 in Mr. Stark's account the day before Mr. Stark's death. So once we've learned that, Mr. Hoffman was a person of interest, but not a suspect.
We also ruled the Russian mobster out as responsible for killing Menachem Stark because we confirmed that he was out of the country at the time of the murder.
With another suspect eliminated, detectives find themselves back at square one.
There was connections to loan sharks. There were connections to the Russian mob. You're dealing with a lot of shady individuals. It can be difficult to determine who did what.
There was a lot of pressure to solve this case. The family was very involved, and the press was all over the story.
We were following up on everything we could. We have no specific leads that are leading anywhere right now. So it was getting a little discouraging at this time.
But it's one of those things where you don't go home until you solve the case. If you didn't like the pressure, you wouldn't be in the Brooklyn squad.
Detectives refocus on the time Menachem Stark was last seen alive.
One of the angles investigators were looking into was that this was premeditated. The people that kidnapped Mr. Stark, how could they know that he was at his office at a specific time? It wasn't just luck that they went out in a blizzard, hung out outside his office at 11:30 at night, and Mr. Stark walked out. So the theory was they had to have had a way to know where Mr. Stark was.
We started to put together that, maybe there was somebody who was giving information to the killers, or there was some tracking advice on Menachem's car. There was a trend that we saw in certain crimes through Brooklyn, because detectives talk to each other. It was sort of a cheap GPS device where people would take cell phones with location trackers on it and sticking them in people's cars or underneath people's cars, and they were able to follow victims or know where they are and be able to abduct them or shoot them.
Armed with this new information, investigators worked the theory that Menachem Stark's SUV was being tracked by his killers.
Crime scene detectives are brought in to, again, forensically go over Mr. Stark's car.
The only way to find out if there was a tracking device under the car was to look. So we examined the car, and there you go. There was a cell phone attached to the gas tank of Menachem Stark's car. It was the general consensus that whoever put the phone under Menachem Stark's car is going to be the guy, or the guy that could lead us to who killed him. Now we have the phone, and it blew the whole case wide open.
In the homicide of Realist, they've discovered a cell phone underneath his vehicle that they believe the killer used to track his movements.
The discovery of this phone was important because law enforcement now can do what's called a forensic extraction, and they can get the data that's in the cell phone.
Finding the cell phone beneath Menachem Stark's car is a huge break for investigators. Devices like cell phones can be treasure troves of evidentiary information. Names, numbers, other data that can help lead investigators to his killer.
As detectives await the analysis on the cell phone, they turn their attention to the van used to kidnap Menachem the night of his murder.
The auto crimes expert had narrowed down the make and model of this van. He had told the detectives you're looking for a Dodge Caravan, and he gave them a year.
Were able to look at this video, which was not very good, but you were able to make out the type of license plate.
We were able to establish that there was Pennsylvania plates on the van. It's tough to make out numbers, but with that, we were able to find that a silver minivan was owned by Philip Felix.
So investigators, they drive out to the address for Philip Felix, and they see the Dodge Caravan parked right outside of the address. They notice the unique things about the Dodge Caravan, and they think right away this is the car that was used to kidnap Mr. Stark.
The good news was it had outstanding parking tickets on it, so we brought it back to the 9-0 precinct and impounded it for the tickets.
With the Dodge Caravan now in police custody, the crime scene unit processes the vehicle, searching for evidence of Mr. Stark's kidnapping and murder.
There was a check that was made out to Mr. Stark from a tenant that was found inside the van.
There are marks on the tilings and on the carpet that could be potential bloodstains. DNA testing and analysis was done, and what they find out is that Menachem Stark's blood was in Philip Felix's van. So they know beyond a shadow of a doubt now that Menachem Stark was kidnapped in this van. Investigators now have to figure out, well, who was driving the van that night and who kidnapped and killed Mr. Stark.
Detectives bring Philip Felix, the van's owner, down to the station for an interview.
When I spoke to Mr. Felix in regards to if he knew who Menachem Stark was, he indicated to me that he did business with Mr. Stark in the past with some kind of construction project.
We asked Mr. Felix about the van, about who uses the van. He told us that the van was used by his son, Erskine. It was used by his nephew. They use it for work. They work as contractors in areas of Brooklyn.
He was a very good poker player, or he had no idea what happened that night. He gave us all the information that we need. We had no reason to hold him, so he was released.
So now we got direction in which way we're going. We have the players involved now, the vehicle that was used, but we still don't know exactly why this occurred.
The case gets another boost when the phone records come back on the cell phone used to track Menakam's vehicle.
The subscriber info on this phone belonged to a Jeff Seeley.
Jeff Seeley is the owner of a construction company in Brooklyn. When investigators dig into the phone records, what they also learn is that Jeff Seeley registered this phone on the Sprint Family Locator Plan so that he could track it on his own account, and then Jeff Seeley or someone strapped this phone to the bottom of Menachem Stark's vehicle, enabling them to track anyone who's driving Mr. Stark's car.
There was phone numbers inside the phone also, and those phone numbers connected to 4 individuals: Irvine Henry, Kendall Felix, and Erskine Felix.
Detectives first turn their attention to the registered owner of the cell phone, Jeff Seeley. They bring him into the station for questioning.
We asked Jeff Seeley if he knew Menachem Stark, and he says that Menachem Stark was a gentleman who they would do construction work for.
Sometimes Jeff Seeley worked for Mr. Stark with Erskine Felix and with Erskine's cousin Kendall Felix. Jeff Seeley tells law enforcement that he set up this phone for his friend Erskine Felix in order to track a girl, because Erskine Felix had told him, "Listen, I'm dating a woman that I don't trust. I need you to help me out. You have Sprint, and Sprint has that Sprint Family Locator program. So can you set this phone up, and I'm going to use it to track this girl?" So Jeff Seeley told investigators, "I set this up for him, I gave him the phone, and that's all I know about it."
When investigators look into Jeff Seeley's alibi, they learn he was at home during the window of time Menachem was killed. Detectives then ask Jeff if he or anyone he knows has any problems with Menachem Stark.
Then Jeff Seeley tells us that Erskine Felix did work for Menachem Stark, and that Menachem Stark owes him about $20,000. We're thinking, here we go, we have motive.
And not only did Erskine Felix work on his job sites, he actually did work in Mr. Stark's home. He was someone who was in Mr. Stark's life and had access to him.
We all believe that the person that put the phone under Menachem Stark's car would be responsible for the murder, and we know that the Felix, and now we have this little bit of information that Menachem Stark owed them $20,000. That's a very good motive to kill somebody.
In the abduction homicide of New York real estate developer Menachem Stark, detectives are closing in on construction contractor Erskine Felix, after discovering Menachem owed him $20,000 for a past job.
Erskine Felix is one of the workers on Menachem Stark's job sites, his various properties. Erskine Felix had the ability to get that tracking device on his car.
Detectives haul Erskine Felix down to the station for questioning.
Erskine is a very large man, very buff, about 6'4". Looks like somebody in the video we saw involved in the kidnapping of Mr. Stark.
Erskine Felix, he came across as a very confident alpha type. He basically said that he loved Menachem Stark and portrayed his relationship with Menachem Stark sort of as like the family member.
When detectives ask Erskine Felix about his financial dealings with Mr. Stark, they get a surprising response.
Erskine Felix said, sometimes he owes me money, but he always pays me, and kind of brushed it off.
Then, detectives confront Erskine about his phone number being in the cell phone found strapped to the bottom of Mr. Stark's car.
He tells investigators that Mr. Stark was scared of somebody, and he actually asked Erskine if Erskine could keep an eye on him. So he says, "I came up with this idea where I was going to track him using this tracking device." And then Erskine tells investigators that he didn't even tell Mr. Stark that he was doing this.
Police aren't buying Erskine Felix's story.
We think that he was full of schnizzle. If he would have stuck with the story that he asked Jeff Seeley for a phone to track his girlfriend, it would be a little bit more credible.
We asked him his whereabouts on the night of January 2nd, and he was steadfast saying that he had been with his girlfriend the whole night. He was very elusive and seemed to be uninterested with this investigation. Our opinion was that Erskine was not being truthful with anything regarding this case.
But without physical evidence or a witness tying Erskine to the crime, detectives are forced to let him go.
At this point, we were all zeroed in on Erskine Felix as being the main character, and we also were looking at his other family members.
From the phone that was strapped to the bottom of Mr. Stark's car, Kendall Felix and Irvine Henry are involved. They're all talking the night of the kidnapping into the early morning hours when the body is dumped.
Hoping for a confession, detectives bring the three other men down to the station for separate interviews.
Investigators interview Kendall Felix, and Irvine Henry as close in time as could be possible. This is a very tight-knit group of family members. So the last thing that investigators want is to interview one person, have him go home, and tell everybody else, this is what I said. Say the same thing.
The behavior of Kendall Felix, Erskine Felix's younger cousin, catches the investigators' attention.
Like everybody in the Felix family, Kendall really looked up to Erskine Felix.
He came across as compassionate. He seemed to be a little bit remorseful on what happened to Malcolm Stark.
This guy's very nervous. You know, he knows something. So we started asking him about his background. He said his father is a reverend. So Detective Collins really hit on with your father is a reverend. You know, it's time to come forward with the truth. The right thing to do is not lie.
When detectives press Kendall Felix about his whereabouts on the night of the crime, they get an unexpected break.
He confessed to what had taken place that night with Mr. Stark. He explains this was all Erskine's plan, and he actually dragged his cousins and brother into it.
With Kendall's confession, detectives are able to piece together Malcolm Stark's final 24 hours.
Kendall Felix tells them that Erskine Felix had approached him prior to that day about a way to get money that was owed to him from Mr. Stark, and he told Kendall to commit this kidnapping with him.
Erskine told Kendall, we're going to go grab Malcolm Stark, we're going to make him write some checks, and Kendall's like, this is crazy, I don't want to do that. But Erskine said, no, you're doing it. Erskine was the one that was calling the shots.
It was more of a robbery extortion plan than it was a murder.
January 2nd, Erskine and Kendall meet up, and Kendall drives the light-colored minivan owned by Philip Felix, and they drive over to Malcolm Stark's office and park their vehicle.
About 6 p.m., Kendall exits the vehicle, Case's location, walks up and down the block, and gets back in the van after that.
At 11:40, Malcolm Stark's walking out of his office, and Erskine Felix goes up to Malcolm Stark, and he puts him in like a bear hug. And Malcolm Stark just starts violently fighting.
Mr. Stark just fighting for his life.
At 11:46, Kendall Felix came up, and they both get Malcolm Stark and throw him in the back of the van.
Erskine and Kendall Felix were trying to subdue Mr. Stark. Erskine climbs on him and puts his full weight on top of Mr. Stark and sits on his chest. They were duct taping and tying up his hands and feet.
And after a time of doing that, Mr. Stark stopped fighting, no longer making noise, and they realized something went terribly wrong. They killed him.
A few minutes later, Erskine Felix texts his cousin, Irvine Henry, for added assistance with the crime.
I think at that point they were so panicked they didn't know what to do, because now you essentially have a dead body in your van, and you need to get rid of the body. So at 12 o'clock, when Veshy, Mr. Stark's wife, tried to locate him and call him, it was Erskine who picked up the phone and then turned off the phone.
At 12:26, Kendall and Erskine pick up Erskine's brother Kendall and his cousin Irvine Henry.
And Erskine tells Kendall and Kendall to dispose of the body. They make it out to Great Neck, Long Island at 3:30 in the morning, and then they throw the body of Menachem Stark into the dumpster fire.
The police recover the body on January 3rd. The plan was to kidnap Mr. Stark and hold him for ransom, and it went horribly wrong. This was a get-rich-quick scheme that Erskine thought up, and he roped up the rest of his family members in.
In September 2019, Erskine Felix stands trial for the kidnapping and murder of Menachem Stark. A jury finds Erskine guilty, and he's sentenced to 24 years to life in prison.
It was pretty clear that this was planned and premeditated by Erskine Felix, and he really destroyed his own family too.
Erskine's accomplice, Kendall Felix, who confessed, is sentenced to 15 years. Erskine's brother, Kendall Felix, and cousin Irvine Henry also plead guilty and are sentenced to 7 years in prison.
When you combine the video surveillance with the phone records and you look at the timeline, and you look at who is calling who at what, when they were together, and what different roles they played.
For Menachem Stark's family and community, his loss continues to be deeply felt.
You want to get some kind of vindication for them, so they have a little bit of a peace of mind that, all right, justice was served.
They do get closure, but they're still going to be missing their father, their brother, their husband. And I know in the Hasidic community there's a saying that the blood won't rest until the person that was responsible for killing the person is prosecuted for his crimes.
I've got a monster out there who did something hideous that needs off the street quickly.
It was just a purely rage-filled revenge attack.
She was naive about life, as innocent as it could be.
She got a scholarship at the Art Institute of Dallas, and she was on her way.
She was thinking she just didn't have time for the relationship. She was wanting to cut him loose.
He's obviously going to feel rejected and left out. It's just a recipe for violence and murder.
She confided she was sexually attracted to her.
She had access to the apartment, suggests that she may have been the killer.
He hated that girl. She was standing in the way between the boy that he was interested in romantically.
I said, you're the only person right now that would have motive to do this. I tell him he's a murderer after we caught him in lies.
Every day in North America, dozens of people are murdered. The key to solving the toughest of these homicides lies in the final 24 hours of the victim's life. To crack the case, detectives must reconstruct that critical timeline. The minutes and hours containing evidence that can help unlock the mystery and catch the killer. Dallas, Texas, the third largest city in the Lone Star State. It long ago outgrew its roots in oil and cattle ranching to become a hub of commerce, high-tech, and the arts.
Dallas is a very diverse city. There's still the old line Baptist churches in Dallas, and there's a thriving LGBTQ community in Dallas.
The atmosphere is, I would like to call it eclectic.
There are 3 different universities in Dallas, lots of college students. It's an exciting place to be when you're young.
We have burglaries, robberies, rapes, property crimes, and unfortunately homicides.
Just after 12 p.m. on a Friday afternoon in early September, a 911 call comes in from a resident of a student housing complex known as the Falls.
I was in the office and dispatch called us and notified us that they had a homicide. The only thing we knew is that it was a female in an apartment complex.
Veteran Detective Paul Elsey of the Dallas Police Department is called to the scene to investigate.
Ashley Olvera was the individual that called 911. She was there to meet the police when they came out to the scene of the murder. There were no signs of forced entry. The door was not damaged.
I didn't see any broken windows, no blood, no bullet holes. Everything looked fine until you entered the bedroom. It was just a horrific sight. There was a lot of dried blood. The smell of death reeked in the room. And I said, a young lady with a t-shirt on, she's got her underwear on, that's all, laying face down in bed. As I look closer, she's got stab wounds on her back, stab wounds on her neck, stab wounds on the right side, and it was very, very brutal crime scene. The covers were messed up, but there was no lamps turned over, there was nothing broken. I mean, it looks like she was maybe sleeping on her stomach and caught unsuspecting.
It appeared like her assailant had just pounced on her. She was completely helpless and unable to defend herself.
I've been around the block. I've seen some pretty horrible things. You see things done to human bodies that should never happen.
It was a gruesome, gruesome scene and deeply affected these hardened investigators to see just how this girl had been destroyed.
The victim is 20-year-old Samantha Nance, known as Shelley, a sophomore at the prestigious Art Institute of Dallas.
She come from a town called Italy, Texas. Italy is a little bitty small bedroom community. Shelley was the third and youngest daughter in a family of 5. Her family was very close.
Shelley was an introvert. From an early age, painting was her outlet. She entered a contest in her junior year in high school. She won that contest and got a scholarship to the Art Institute of Dallas, and she was on her way.
Shelley wasn't the typical college student. She wasn't going out partying. She pretty much liked to stay at home, playing a video game, listening to music, and drawing.
You couldn't dislike Shelley Nance. She was a beautiful soul.
To track down Shelley Nance's killer, investigators will need to piece together the last 24 hours of her life.
Obviously, one of the important things we're looking for is the approximate time of death. So based on her body's state of condition, the medical examiner estimated the time of death was approximately 24 hours prior to her being found, and his best estimate was between 9 a.m. and 12 noon the prior day, Thursday, which would be the morning of the 10th.
With a broad window of death established, police begin processing the crime scene.
We noticed that there was a little bitty sliver of a blue plastic material that was, I believe, on her arm, close to her hand, that just didn't fit. I didn't see anything in the apartment that it would have came from, so that was bagged and tagged and sent to the crime lab for analysis.
Investigators get another surprise when they enter the bathroom.
One sink has 2 or 3 little small drops of blood that you can tell.
My thinking is maybe the killer cleaned up before they left, and if they were injured, it could have been their own blood.
They collected swabs for future comparison, whether it...
The rest of the apartment seems untouched, except for one thing.
We got to the kitchen, and they had a set of knives in there. And Ashley looked at it, and she thought that at least 1 or maybe 2 knives weren't there. They weren't in the dishwasher, they weren't in the sink, they couldn't be accounted for. So at that point, maybe the killer did not bring a weapon with him and used a weapon at the sink. Could be a possibility, we don't know.
Investigators work to develop a theory of the crime.
I'm trying to think of a motive. Everything looked in place in the apartment. Her laptop was there, things that is normally taken. The burglary is still there. Shelley had her underwear on, so immediately I thought, well, maybe sexual assault is not a motive.
Looking for answers to what went on during the final 24 hours of Shelley's life, detectives turned to the forensics.
They were able to determine that Shelley had been on her laptop from about midnight to almost 6 in the morning of September the 10th, just doing schoolwork. At about 5:57 a.m., Shelley signed off and she finally went to sleep.
What happened really, really bad happened after 6 a.m. Anytime a person is attacked and murdered with a knife, it's been my experience that it's something very personal, that they generally know the victim, because when you use a knife on somebody, you have to get in their space. I mean, you want them to know what's happening.
Shelley wasn't killed, she was overkilled. This was a crime of hate, a crime of passion.
The closest person to her inside this apartment is Ashley. We have to establish that she's telling the truth, where her whereabouts are, and see if she has a motive for such a hideous crime.
Investigators bring Shelley's roommate, Ashley Olvera, down to the police station for an interview.
Ashley's demeanor was not the kind of demeanor I would expect had my roommate gotten murdered. She was kind of monotone, or maybe she was in shock, I don't know. Ashley was also a student at the Dallas Art Institute. She was Shelley's roommate, had been for 2 or 3 months, but they didn't have what I would consider a normal female relationship. You know, if you got 2 girls living under one roof, and I can tell you this because I had 2 daughters, they're fussing over the bathroom, they're fussing over food. That wasn't happening. Shelley stayed in her room. She took care of her business, very quiet, to the point that Ashley sometimes didn't even know she was home. She's asked, obviously, what she was doing the morning of the 10th.
Tell me about Thursday. I just remember getting up, taking my shower, going to class.
Hey, what time did you get up Thursday?
Sometime around 7:30, possibly 8. I usually wake up between 7 or 8. Class is at 9.
That afternoon to go back home.
And you was there all evening? Yes, sir.
All night?
I was in my room.
Till Friday?
Yes.
When we asked if she noticed if Shelley was home when she got home that afternoon, she stated she didn't know. She assumed she was, but she was quiet.
So when Ashley didn't see Shelley, she didn't think anything of it because they would go, hours, sometimes day at a time, when they wouldn't see each other at the apartment.
The next day, Ashley had left for school at the same time, 8 a.m. But around 9:45 a.m., an administrator had approached her. The school had received a call from Shelley's parents, who hadn't heard from her in over 24 hours.
They asked Ashley if she knew where Shelley was. Ashley assumed Shelley was still in her room back at the apartment.
They asked her to go home and check on Shelley. She gets to her apartment about 11:45 a.m. She knocks on the door, yells for Shelley. She don't get an answer. She knocked again, no answer. After the second time she knocked with no answer, she opened the door. And inside the room, it's dimly lit because the curtains are pulled. So she walks up, grabs Shelley by a foot, kind of shakes her, and she's cold. It startles her, and she saw what the monster had did.
Ashley Olvera then called 911.
Detectives find it strange that Ashley hadn't noticed that Shelley had been lying dead in her room for 24 hours.
The simple oddity of her not having any contact with her roommate suggests that potentially she may have been the killer. She had access to the apartment. She had access to her roommate.
I just got to tell you, you're the only person I'm looking at. You're the only person right now that would have motive to do this. I said, what the hell happened between you and Shelley that was so horribly bad that it resulted in this? Why did you do this?
In the brutal stabbing of 20-year-old art student Shelley Nance, investigators have her roommate and classmate, Ashley Olvera, in their sights.
When I asked her if she was in the bathroom that morning to get ready to go to school, she said she was. I asked her if she noticed the blood.
When did you first notice the blood in the sink? That was this morning I noticed it. I was flossing my teeth and I went to turn my head and I noticed it.
And I asked her, I said, why in the world would you see blood in there and you didn't care enough about her to knock on the door and say, hey, are you okay? Are you bleeding? What's up? She said she didn't register. It didn't mean anything to her. And I thought that kind of odd. I asked her, I said, you've been roommates for a while and there's conflicts that comes with that. Then I accused her of killing her. And she said I didn't do it. Not very emotional. Not, oh my God, you're accusing me of murder? This is my roommate.
Investigators need more evidence to arrest Ashley and are forced to let her go.
It certainly seems that Ashley would have had the opportunity to murder Shelley. But what investigators don't know is, why would she? That's a question they want answered before they make their next move.
Detectives reach out to Shelley's mom, Cynthia Nance, hoping she can shed more light on Shelley and who might have wanted to hurt her.
Obviously, the police were interested in finding out from Cynthia who was close to Shelley. Did she have a boyfriend? Did she have any known enemies? In Cynthia's eyes, Shelley had never met anybody that just didn't immediately warm up to her. Cynthia was racking her brain about who could have done this. And really, the only individual that kind of kept rolling around in Cynthia's mind was this boy that her daughter had dated a few times.
Learn that she has a boyfriend named Nathan, and that they haven't been going together very long, but a couple of months.
Their big deal was going to anime festivals, and they were both into that. Cynthia thought it was significant that about 2 weeks before Shelley's murder, Shelley had told Cynthia that she was going to break up with Nathan.
She was thinking about telling him that, she just didn't have time for the relationship. It wasn't going in the direction that she thought it should go, and she just wanted to cut him loose. So Nathan now becomes a person of interest that we need to locate and get down there and start interviewing him.
Detectives bring 20-year-old art student Nathan Shuck down to the station for an interview.
I said, Nathan, you're down here because a crime happened to Shelley. She was found murdered. And it's like it just went in one ear and out the other. Like it don't register, not very emotional. It's like, what? I don't know if the guy's in shock. He didn't have the reaction that I would think.
At first, Nathan seems like an unlikely killer.
The best way to describe Nathan was he was 19 going on about 13.
He's just a little bitty skinny guy who likes art. His mom raised him, and he's doted on.
Nathan still, even though he was living there in town in Dallas, he would go home days at a time. His mama would cut the crust off his bread like she'd done since he was about 3 years old.
I said, what the hell happened? And I probably even fibbed to him a little bit and said, well, you're the last person seen with her alive. You was over at her apartment. He's like, no, I didn't do it. You need to look for somebody else.
Looking for a motive, detectives push him for details about his and Shelley's relationship.
They were both new at the dating game, so they were taking things slow.
I asked him, what is the extent of your relationship? Are you sexually involved with Shelley?
We've spent a lot of time together, but we were never really, intimate, physically.
Why?
Well, to me, I was never really gung-ho in my pursuit of, sex.
Just a very unusual boyfriend-girlfriend relationship.
Detectives believe that if Nathan is the killer, he may have defensive injuries from the struggle with Shelley.
When did you get a break, brother? And scratches? Oh, I usually scratch myself.
Nathan explained to him he was a fidgety sleeper. He didn't trim his fingernails like he probably should have, and these were self-inflicted in the middle of the night, but they could have been for Shelley fighting back.
Detectives drill down on Nathan's whereabouts during the window of time when Shelley was killed.
We're trying to get his timeline established, and I asked him the last time he either talked to her in person or by telephone when he talked to Shelley.
I texted her on Wednesday.
Did you physically look at her Wednesday?
No, I did not see her on Wednesday.
I also asked Nathan the last time he physically saw Shelley, and he told me that him and her had attended an art festival downtown.
When was the last time you talked to her and heard her voice? It was Monday.
I asked him what happened after the art show that they attended. Where did he go? Did he go to her house or his apartment? He said no, that he went to his mom's house.
Nathan had been sick, and he was sick enough that he decided to go home to his mom and get some home cooking and sleep in his own bed. Nathan told his mom the day before the murders he was feeling better and he wanted to go to school the next day. His mom drove Nathan in from their home on the morning of September the 10th and dropped him off at his apartment.
Prompted by Cynthia's knowledge of their impending breakup, detectives dig deeper into the state of Nathan and Shelley's relationship.
Do you think she had any plans of breaking up with you? No. You feel pretty solid? Yeah, I told you about that.
He had no idea that Shelley was going to share that kind of information with him, so if he was jealous, which is sometimes motive for violence, that wasn't on the radar.
But there is about a 4-hour time gap between 9 and about 1 o'clock on the afternoon of September the 10th, where Nathan is basically unaccounted for.
So he would still have had the opportunity to commit this crime, and we still needed to look at him as a suspect.
With suspicion swirling around Nathan, police asked to search his apartment, looking for evidence to connect him to the crime.
This was a horrendous crime with a lot of blood evidence, so it's reasonable to believe that whoever attacked her also had blood transfer on shoes shoes that may have a speck or a drop, blood on them, and we're looking for weapons, but at this point we just know that it's a sharp instrument. We still don't know if it's a knife or if it's a pair of scissors, a piece of glass. We don't know. We're going through drawers. We're going through dirty clothes hampers. We don't see any blood evidence. We just don't see any clothing that's got any evidence that we're interested in. And when we get to Nathan's room, we open up a box. It's got knives, it has daggers, it has Japanese throwing stars, it's got swords.
These were high-quality knives, an unusual collection for a 19-year-old kid to have under his bed. And the detectives confronted Nathan. He goes, that's what I'm into. I've been into the ninja mentality, the anime, that whole genre since I was a little kid.
Weird stuff. And then we walk into a bathroom, and beside the sink, a plastic Ziploc baggie.
You can see what appeared to be matted hair and what appeared to be blood on the inside of the Ziploc baggie.
That's the moment that I really got excited. I was hoping and praying, please let the lab confirm that these are Shelley's blood and Shelley's hairs. I asked Nathan, I says, whose bathroom is this? He says, it's mine. So what's that plastic bag there? And he looked at it and immediately had a old look on his face. And he says, I think I need a lawyer. That little boy that I was talking to now made a statement like a grown man, like somebody who has something to hide would say. We're through. Stick a fork in it. I'm done. There can be no other guy committed this murder except Nathan.
In the horrific stabbing of 20-year-old art student Shelley Nance, investigators are zeroing in on her boyfriend, Nathan Shuck.
You've got a kid that was dating the victim. His mom was saying the victim was getting ready to broke up with, so you got motive. You've got opportunity because he's still seeing Shelley, has access to Shelley, and now you've got potential murder weapons underneath the bed, and then the cherry on top of it is this Ziploc bag with blood and hair.
But I have no idea whose blood that is until we get DNA back on it, and it takes time. We don't have enough to arrest him for it. His timeline that he gave us still needs validated and checked out, so I released Nathan that day.
To build their case against Nathan, investigators turned to the autopsy results, which revealed disturbing insights into the killer's mindset.
There were not any observable signs that she had been sexually assaulted, but there were 42 individual stab wounds. Some of them led law enforcement. The killer enjoyed what he was doing.
When you see this type of array of stab wounds on a victim's body, not only the sheer number, fluctuating depths and locations, this is just one of two things. You're dealing with a sexual sadist who's obtaining pleasure and prolonging this for their own gratification, or alternatively, you're dealing with someone who has such deep-seated visceral hatred of the victim that they want to ensure the maximum level of agony.
To continue their investigation into Nathan's possible role in the murder of Shelley Nance, they're going to talk to everybody they can talk to find out, what do you know about Nathan?
During the initial interview that I had with Nathan, he told me that he shared an apartment with another male. He identified him as a guy named Daniel.
Daniel William was not your typical Art Institute student. He was 5 to 6 years older. He'd been in the Navy. He'd seen more of the world.
I look at Daniel. I see a little bitty short, pudgy, non-threatening, soft-spoken. Daniel, do you have any idea why you're here? No idea whatsoever. Well, some terrible thing has happened. A good friend of yours got hurt. Shelley?
She's not my friend, but she's my girlfriend.
When I talk to Daniel about the relationship he has with Nathan, it just gets weirder.
Daniel told the police he was openly gay, but assured the police that his relationship with Nathan was strictly platonic.
But Daniel let it be known that he doted over Nathan, cooked him breakfast, made sure that he had a lunch to take to school. When it was available, he would shuttle him to and forth from class. I mean, he did everything but wash him and wipe his butt. Come to find out that Daniel knew Shelley, he didn't like Shelley. He expressed that he didn't think Shelley was good for Nathan, that she was a distractor.
Nathan, it appeared to Daniel, had become obsessed with Shelley, that he began stalking Shelley, that Nathan's schoolwork was suffering because of his deep feelings for Shelley.
And it's like a parent talking to a kid in a troubled relationship, stay away from this person. They're not good for you. You know, you need to cut them loose and you need to focus on school. Just a very weird, unusual situation.
Intrigued with the nature of their close friendship, detectives questioned Daniel for his account of events the day of the murder.
What time did Nathan get here? He got here yesterday morning when his mom dropped him off. I took him to school and dropped him off. I said, what time was that? He said, 8:30. I said, okay, what'd you do next? He said, well, I had an assignment that I had to take care of. He said that he had to go photograph something at one of our local parks called White Rock Lake, but he forgot his camera, which is kind of strange. I asked him what he did when he got to the lake, and he said, well, I went to my friend Jessica's house. I said, was she home? He says, no. What'd you do then? I just heard he wasn't sure.
Daniel then reveals that he is also good friends with Ashley Olvera, Shelley's roommate. This immediately piques the investigators' interest.
Daniel told police that Ashley confided in Daniel that she was sexually attracted to Shelley. This is the first time that the Dallas police had heard anything about that.
He summed it up as maybe she was having some thoughts of being gay or was contemplating experimenting with a gay relationship.
Armed with this new information, detectives begin to consider a new theory of the crime. Could Ashley have had a crush on Shelley that wasn't reciprocated, leading to murder?
This case has got twists and turns, crazy motives, unusual relationships, and it just gets weirder. We asked Ashley about what we had learned from Daniel as to her struggling with her sexuality. She validated that that was a true statement. I asked her if she was at any time had any romantic feelings for Shelley. She said absolutely not. Her and Shelley didn't have anything in common other than they shared the same roof and they went to the same class.
Has Daniel been in your apartment before? No. Never? I didn't want him to. And that's what Shelley, if he ever does Shelley come by the apartment, call and tell me. Because Daniel's personality was always trying to cause trouble, friction of some sort.
And they specifically asked her about Daniel's portrayal of the relationship between Nathan and Shelley and how Nathan had become obsessed. Ashley painted a completely different picture of the relationship between Nathan and Shelley that Daniel was trying to portray.
What do you think about Daniel? Well, the thing is that he was always sitting in the back of my mind. Because for a long time he didn't want Shelley and Nathan to be a couple. And then all this stuff is happening.
The roommate tells us that if anyone's obsessed with anyone else, it's Daniel that seems to be obsessed with Nathan.
With Daniel and Ashley offering two different versions of events, detective suspicions are aroused.
Typically, it's human behavior to lie. The question is why? And are we lying because we're ashamed and we're trying to conceal information that's not related to the crime? Or are we lying because we have guilty knowledge or involvement and we're trying to cover up our actions?
In the brutal murder of 20-year-old art student Shelley Nance, detectives have two suspects in their crosshairs. Her boyfriend Nathan Shuck and her roommate Ashley Olvera. But new information has introduced a possible third suspect.
Daniel didn't want Nathan to be alone with Shelley. Daniel expressed dissatisfaction to Ashley about Shelley being around Nathan.
He constantly talks about it. It always ends up the conversation being about Shelley and how much he despises her. It's nonstop negative.
Had texted Shelley, asked him could he go along and be involved when they went out. Like the weekend that they went to the convention, not only on that occasion, but prior occasions. And she felt that a little weird. You know, you don't invite a third wheel out on a date. Shelley got vibrations that something wasn't right. She sensed that if Daniel had his way, he would have liked to seen her out of the picture so he could pursue Nathan and maybe escalate that to another level.
Ashley then reveals that on the day Shelley was murdered, Daniel bombarded her with texts.
We found out that he had texted Ashley at 10:02 a.m. and they had a conversation. And basically it was a question about where you at, what are you doing, do you want to go for lunch, do you want to meet me? She said, no, I don't think so, I'm in class. And then he texted Ashley again about 2 hours later, exactly 12:03 p.m., and he's asking her again, are you still at school, are you going home, are you sure you don't want to go for lunch? She's like, no, I'm fine, I'm staying at school, I'll eat lunch here.
This wasn't usual for Daniel to be sending a flurry of texts to Ashley. Shelley Nance was murdered sometime between 9 a.m. and noon, and that time frame in mind, the text messages now between Daniel William and Ashley Olvera took on added significance.
What we implied from that is that he was trying to make sure that she wasn't at home and that where she was at between those hours.
Before the interview wrapped up, the detective asked Ashley if there's anything else she thought they would be interested in that might help in the investigation.
He borrowed my keys once. Who? Danny. Danny borrowed your keys once? Why? He borrowed my car to get keys.
Ashley remembered about 10 days before the murder that Daniel had locked his keys in his own car. He was in a hurry and he asked to borrow Ashley's car.
When did you get a car back? 20 almost took like an hour or so. What double keys do you have in there? One was sleeping. You made a copy of it? No.
I asked her to check to see if it was still there, and she said it was still there, but she thought it had been taken off and put back on, and I asked her why. And then that's when she mentioned it used to be in the middle, but now it's on the end. And it used to be flipped this way, but it's flipped the other way, and I realize now that when I put my key in, something was different, but I didn't realize it until you just mentioned it. There was no signs of forced entry, so Daniel had the opportunity to have a key made if he had wanted to. Based on the time that this occurred, he has a motive, he has the opportunity, he has the means to gain entry without being detected. Daniel's looking pretty good right now.
It's entirely possible for somebody to be in a love triangle where somebody is, trying to obtain the affection from one person and upset because they faced a murder.
So now we have three suspects. We have Ashley, we have Nathan, and we have Daniel. Now we have to go through the process of elimination. The detectives was able to validate through witness interviews, timestamps, and surveillance video at the school that Ashley was in school between 9 a.m. and 12 noon. So she's got a pretty good alibi.
With Ashley eliminated as a suspect, investigators shift their focus to Daniel William.
They wanted to go over again Daniel's timeline about the events of the morning of September the 10th. And I think Daniel was confident. He had no problem talking to the police a second time.
And he tells us, yes, I went to White Rock Lake directly there to do a photo shoot after I dropped Nathan off at school. I asked him what time he got to White Rock Lake. He said around 8:30, maybe a little bit after. Okay, what did you do then? Well, I went to Walmart. Walmart?
Just that little seemingly innocuous point about Daniel going to the Walmart, they said, wait a minute, he didn't say anything about going to the Walmart the first time we talked to him.
How long was your Walmart? Not very long. What'd you buy at Walmart? He said, well, I bought some hair color, I bought something else, 2 or 3 items. What happened after you left Walmart? Well, I went to see a girl that lives in the Falls Apartments. What for? Well, I just went to visit her. So I asked him, what time did you get there? I don't know, 11 o'clock, 11:30? I said, was she home? No. Now, this is the same complex that Shelley lives in.
And this is like a double whoops now for the police. Of all the apartment complexes in Dallas County, he's at the apartment complex at about the time when Shelley Nance is murdered on September the 10th of 2009.
So the fact that he didn't add that before was definitely a bomb that we were taken aback by.
So let's just say that the interest in Daniel William now is becoming real important.
Time is wasted. I've got a monster out there who did something hideous that needs off the street quickly.
In their brutal murder of Shelley Nance, police have a surprising new suspect in their sights. The roommate of Shelley's boyfriend, Nathan, a fellow art student named Daniel William.
By his own admission, he put himself at the crime scene during the time this murder occurred.
With questionable new information coming to light, detectives dig into Daniel's story to see if his timeline checks out.
Walmart's, they have surveillance video.
You can see Daniel. He's got his phone. He's texting. This is at 10:02. It corresponds with a text he's sending Ashley. Ashley, where she's at, what she's doing. Does she want to go to lunch?
And there he is, just like he said he would. What he didn't tell the police was that he purchased another item, and that was a package of blue nitrile gloves.
We remembered that little bitty blue piece of nitrite glove material found on her body.
Police were able to go back out and buy a duplicate box of the blue nitrile gloves with the hopes of being able to conduct a forensic comparison between the piece of blue plastic found on Shelly Nance's arm and the blue nitrile gloves that Daniel William had bought.
Then the results come in from the forensic evidence collected at the crime scene and from Nathan and Daniel's apartment.
Probably the most significant finding of all the items seized at the scene of Shelly Nance's murder is number one, the blood evidence found there in the sink in the bathroom at her apartment. And the DNA came back that was the blood of Shelly Nance. Of equal importance, the police got back information concerning whose DNA it was in the Ziploc baggie with the blood and hair in it. The police found in the bathroom of Nathan Shuck. And that also came back to be the DNA of Shelly Nance. Now you have the DNA, the blood and hair of the murder victim in the apartment of Nathan Shuck and in the apartment of Daniel William.
Detectives now know that either Nathan or Daniel killed Shelly Nance. But which one had the opportunity?
Nathan is validated to be in school by surveillance video, and other students put him in class between 9 a.m. and 2 p.m. the day the murder occurred. So after we're able to establish an alibi that Nathan could not have did it, the only person left is Daniel. So we have a third interview with Daniel. He's tense, he's nervous, and I dig into him hard. I tell him he's a murderer. I tell him he did it. After we caught him in lies, we've already pulled his surveillance video the day before Shelly was found dead that he was at Walmart buying plastic gloves. I pulled the picture of Shelly out, and I show him a picture of the crime scene. It was gruesome to look at, and he just covered his face and cried like a baby. Said he didn't do it. Didn't do it. No, he didn't do it.
I'm going to leave it for a little bit. If you think that you might have forgot something when I come back, let me know. Okay? Yes, sir.
Then, a final piece of forensic evidence seals Daniel's fate.
The most important piece of evidence was that little bitty blue speck of plastic. The lab was able to take that little piece of plastic and scientifically compare it to the box of gloves that Daniel was observed buying at Walmart on videotape, and scientifically confirmed that that piece of plastic was of the same material, same roll, same. So that put him at the crime scene. I'm telling you, he had means to do it, he had motive to do it, he had opportunity to do it, and by his own admission, he put himself at the crime scene during the time this murder occurred.
He hated that girl. She was standing in the way between Daniel and Nathan Shuck, a boy that he was interested in romantically.
Detectives are now able to piece together Shelly Nance's final 24 hours.
We know that Shelly and her mom spoke with each other on the night of Wednesday, September the 9th.
After the conversation with her mom, Shelly stayed up all night long and on her computer from midnight till 6 a.m. the next morning.
She falls asleep while using her laptop until Ashley goes to school that morning at 8 o'clock.
Daniel dropped Nathan off at school about 8:30. Then he said he went to White Rock Lake, went to Walmart.
Daniel William purchased a bar of soap, dye, and a box of blue nitrile plastic gloves. Daniel was texting Ashley repeatedly between 10:02 a.m. that morning and about 12 o'clock that morning, asking him about going to lunch with her, where she is. It's apparent that Daniel is very concerned about Ashley O'Bear's whereabouts during this time frame.
Daniel ended up at the Falls Apartments around 11 o'clock.
He had made a copy of Ashley O'Bear's front door key. He let himself into that apartment and went back to that bedroom where that little girl was sleeping.
He was able to enter the apartment undetected, pounce on her back, stab her 42 times.
He'd worn those blue plastic gloves to make sure he didn't leave any fingerprints. But he didn't see that little piece of blue plastic that had come off during the savage assault.
So while Daniel's alibi maybe wasn't locked down super tight, I think it shows that he had a lot of pre-planning, forethought, premeditation, whatever word you want to put on it.
Nathan's affection is shown towards Shelly and not Daniel, who is, for all intents and purposes, acting like a romantic partner and doing favors for him and running errands for him. That Nathan isn't going to recognize his affectionate gestures for what they are, and ultimately Daniel decides that he needs to remove Shelly from the equation.
It was just a purely rage-filled revenge attack because he loathed Shelley.
You understand that you're being charged with murder, right? No, okay. You're being charged with murder, okay?
On December 8th, 2009, Daniel William is charged with the first-degree murder of Samantha Shelley Nance.
I've seen things did to human body that you can't imagine, but the scene of that little girl laying in that bed with those stab wounds, I'll never forget.
He's found Williams' own cell phone, the surveillance video at Walmart, to the medical examiner's opinion on time of death. Everything fit like a blue nitrile glove.
I went to Shelley's funeral. She's the only victim that I've worked in my entire career that I went to her funeral. I did. I just felt I needed to be there.
The good thing for me, when I had recurring nightmares about my daughter, is I could wake up and realize it was just a nightmare, that she was still around. Sam and Cynthia and Shelley's sisters, they don't have that luxury. So yeah, this was personal. It was personal back in 2009, and it'll be personal till the day I die.
This was the most horrific crime in Lewis County's history.
Ed and Minnie Marin were treasures of the community. Well, it's not normal for them to go and disappear.
Law enforcement gets into the car and they discover a large amount of blood.
They were both the victims of a cold-blooded, execution-style double homicide.
Everybody's calling in saying, it looks like this person, looks like that person. And there were maybe 300 suspects.
Minnie and Ed's grandson fit the bill for a suspect in this case.
She had a criminal history and extreme drug use.
They were known for fighting, abuse, domestic assaults.
He had been bragging about how he had killed them.
This is the tip. This is everything we've been waiting for.
This blows the case wide open.
Every day in North America, dozens of people are murdered. The key to solving the toughest of these homicides lies in the final 24 hours of the victim's life. To crack the case, detectives must reconstruct that critical timeline. The minutes and hours containing evidence that can help unlock the mystery and catch the killer. Lewis County, Washington. A rough and tumble logging community built up around the small town haven of Chehalis.
Lewis County is a rural county which is located almost exactly halfway between Seattle and Portland. It's primarily agriculture, timber, farming, that type of thing. Chehalis is a small, tight-knit community, especially back in the 80s. Most people knew each other, but the outskirts of Chehalis was more of the Wild West. There wasn't a lot of law enforcement out in those areas, and so I think people tended to take matters into their own hands a little bit more. Lewis County itself didn't have that many violent crimes, and when we did, it was a major thing to us, and we would all concentrate on it.
As the townsfolk prepare to usher in another holiday season, a mysterious disappearance shakes Chehalis.
On December 19, 1985, 10:30 a.m., Shirley Hadler gets a phone call about her parents, Ed and Minnie Marin. Ed is 81 years old at the time, and Minnie's 83 years old. Ed and Minnie every year hosted a Christmas social with all their friends from church, and on this particular day, people are showing up and nobody can find Ed and Minnie Marin.
This is not like them at all. They were very conservative, they were very punctual.
Shirley and some other family members go over to the house. They notice that the curtains are shut, the doors are locked. Ed and Minnie's 19 members gained entry, and they started looking around, and they noticed that things were definitely not correct. They could see that was covered with newspapers that looked like someone actually hid the purse because of something going on.
Shirley and the family members are obviously worried because they know their parents and that they know something's amiss. They begin to call friends. They drive the roads around the house and other areas. And after they've exhausted all their resources, Shirley makes the decision to call 911 at 6:05 p.m. that evening.
The missing couple are prominent, hard-working seniors, Ed and Minnie Marin.
Ed and Minnie Marin were an elderly retired couple, very well known in the community. They loved playing cards with friends, going to church, just good, wholesome people.
Ed and Minnie Marin owned a large piece of property next to their house, and that they had allowed that to be leased for a Christmas tree farm. They were extremely kind, helped the people all the time. They sounded like everybody's ideal grandparents.
Working Ed and Minnie Marin's suspicious disappearance is Lewis County Detective David Nizer.
The family called them in as missing people. When that happened in Lewis County, the entire resources of the sheriff's office were immediately focused on this case.
When a person goes missing, much less two people, and of a more senior age, one of the things you're going to look for at their residence is obviously signs of a struggle. Valuables missing, evidence of some kind of disruption in what would otherwise be a pretty predictable day-to-day life.
Detectives start coming, and they know once they get there, there's a problem. They saw a shoebox with a bunch of bank statements and invoices that were laying on the bathroom floor. But the deputies are seeing the purse with the newspaper over it, and the shoebox with bank statements. They're thinking that something went bad here.
And then their car is missing, not to mention the fact that they didn't notify any of their family members that they would have left for some reason. All led law enforcement to believe that they've got what appears to be a burglary or possible kidnapping.
With the house offering few clues to the Marin's whereabouts, investigators turn to the family. They begin with the Marin's daughter, Hazel.
Hazel spoke with her mom on December 18th at about 6:30 in the evening, had quite a long discussion with her.
Hazel told the detectives that her mom was excited about the Christmas social they're having the next day, and she didn't seem like anything was wrong or if there was a problem at the time.
On December 19th, the guests for the party arrived around 10:30 a.m. When the guests arrive, the house is empty. Nobody is answering the door.
When the 5 p.m., and they report that Ed and Minnie Marin were missing.
So in any kidnapping case, the longer the event goes on, the more likely something is going to happen to the individual who's been taken.
You only have so much time. You got to find these people as quick as possible. The next morning, on December 20th, about 7:30 in the morning, a person called to report that a 1969 Chrysler Newport was parked in one of the corners of the Yardbirds parking lot. Back in 1980s, Yardbirds was like the big monster box store.
It's found in the middle of a vacant parking lot. It's pretty obvious someone placed the vehicle there and left it where it wouldn't be noticed by a lot of people. That was suspicious. Law enforcement gets into the car and they discover a large amount of what appears to be blood on the front seat, as well as little pellets that are consistent with shotgun shell pellets. We then began to think the worst. It was obvious something very bad had happened in that vehicle. We didn't know where the Morins were. They had not been found yet, just their car. And if there's blood in the vehicle and this is their car, this is not good.
To solve the suspected kidnapping and murder of Ed and Minnie Marin, detectives will need to unravel the 24 hours before they were last seen. They begin by asking employees at Yardbirds Shopping Center if they witnessed anything unusual in the parking lot on December 19th.
When employees were on their lunch break around noon on the 19th, they had seen a white male with brownish colored hair, long hair, and described this individual walking away from the area where the Marin's vehicle was located, carrying what appeared to be a long rifle that was covered up by some sort of a small blanket.
The witnesses said he was in his 20s, and he's about 5'10" thin. Looks like he's wearing a green army jacket, a stocking cap, blue jeans, lager boots.
This person came from the vicinity of the car, and he was out of place and carrying a firearm, so we had to think that he could be involved. So we had a sketch done with an artist, hoping that someone might recognize the sketch.
With a sketch of the Marin's possible killer in hand, the Sheriff's Department leads a search for Minnie and Ed.
They were searching everywhere, all the roads, the ditches. It was extensive. It went on for days with the hope that they would find the Marines.
The terrain is difficult. It takes a lot of people to cover this kind of ground in searching. Unfortunately, it's a needle in a haystack.
Then, at 9 a.m. on Christmas Eve, 5 days after Minnie and Ed were taken, A call comes in that turns
At the time is one of those store mannequins. And so he approaches it and gets up closer and notices that this is a body. He immediately reports it to the first house that he comes across.
Detectives immediately responded and found the body of Minnie Morin. Across from where her body was found was the body of Ed Morin. They appear to have been shot in the back and the neck area. That's what killed both of them.
The victims were shot with double-aught buckshot. It does cause severe damage to the tissue, and this would cause a lot of bleeding and really a horrific thing for the detectives to see as well.
It's just such a senseless crime. Defenseless old people are murdered and then dumped like garbage along the road. This was the most horrific crime in Lewis County's history.
They were both the victims of a cold-blooded, execution-style double homicide. When police realize it's a double-aught buckshot shell, they know they're dealing with a 12-gauge shotgun. Considering the rural logging community where these murders occurred, that would actually not be an unusual weapon for many people to possess, which makes narrowing down who owned that weapon and who used it on Ed and Minnie all the more difficult. Who would want to target and murder this beloved couple?
Days after Minnie and Ed Morin were kidnapped from their home. Their bodies have been found on a quiet logging road on the edge of the small town of Chehalis, Washington.
When the detectives are processing the scene of Ed and Minnie, they are coming up with some theories of what occurred.
It's believed, based upon the evidence with regard to the blood in the vehicle, as well as the pellets that were found in the vehicle, that both Ed and Minnie were shot in their own car and then pulled out of the car. The detectives go through Ed's clothing. They find a blood-soaked bank receipt. The withdrawal statement has the date of December 19th in the amount of $8,500.
The detectives started to theorize what occurred. It looks like a home invasion. The suspects involved in this case would assume that Ed and Minnie Morin were wealthy because they had a beautiful little farmhouse on 100-something acres.
It's a reasonably safe assumption that they were kidnapped and taken to the bank and forced to withdraw this cash, and then eventually killed as a result of it.
Detectives believe the murders occurred in the morning hours of December 19th because the Morin's car was dropped off on the 19th.
They seem to have been kidnapped and then killed in service to some financially motivated murder scheme. Police are now looking for a man who may be known to police.
Armed with the theory of the murder, detectives questioned the bank teller who helped Ed on December 19th, the day the Morins were kidnapped.
The bank teller informs law enforcement that Ed called the bank on December 19th between 9:30 and 10 in the morning requesting $8,500 be ready for him when he was going to come in and pick it up. So Ed arrived at the bank at approximately 10:30 a.m. on December 19th.
Bank teller, not accustomed to seeing Ed do the financials, starts questioning Mr. Morin about where's his wife Minnie. Ed said, well, she's out in the car, she's not feeling well.
When Ed leaves the bank, the teller went outside to say hi to Minnie. Ed had parked quite a ways from the front doors to the bank. The teller could see what she thought was another individual other than Minnie in the vehicle, but the windows were a little fogged up, so she couldn't tell who it was.
Realizing the suspect was in the car with the Morins, detectives began processing the vehicle, hoping forensic evidence will help them identify the mystery passenger.
When they processed the vehicle forensically, they found a lot of fingerprints. They found Ed and Minnie Morin's fingerprints, and then they found some other family members. Well, when they found other family members, they had to follow up on these fingerprints.
When a homicide occurs, a decent percentage of the time, the victim and the suspect know each other. So in this case, we had to think about, okay, could it be a family member?
Detectives called the Morin family down to the station, interviewing them one at a time.
We looked at all family members who had any kind of prior history of illegal activity, and young Mike was one of those who was a bit of a rabble-rouser. Young Mike liked to fight. Law enforcement knew him. And because we knew him, he had to be considered one of many possible suspects at the time.
and he wasn't that fond of law enforcement, and so he's taking it personal that they're spending time on him.
So Michael, Minnie and Ed's grandson, is known to be a heavy drinker. It's possible that maybe he was using drugs and needed some money. So in this way, he might fit the bill for a suspect in this case. He checks the boxes of the profile.
Having set their sights on Michael, detectives begin questioning him about his whereabouts on December 19th.
Michael said that he left for work with his father, Dennis, around 5 a.m. He said the pair then got to work around 5:30 a.m. He then worked the day at his father's logging company until his father told him that Ed and Minnie had gone missing. The foreman who was supervising Michael's work on December 19th did confirm that he arrived as scheduled that morning. Based on Michael's timeline and the timeline of the murder, it's physically impossible for him to have been
in search of leads that will point them in the direction of a suspect. Police reach out to the community.
When you're dealing with a small town, it can be easier to get tips. That's because everyone knows one another. If the Morans or their car had actually passed someone, people would have recognized them.
With the hundreds of tips that are coming in, the detectives are starting to piece together a timeline.
Neighbors reported seeing a white vehicle in the Marin driveway on December 19th between 7:30 and 8 a.m. in the morning. A male was seen standing next to the white vehicle. Lucy Shriver was driving her son, Jason Shriver, to the dentist. Lucy and Jason passed the Marins in their vehicle. They could see both of the Marins, but neither one of them could say who else may have been in the Marins' car with them.
Around 10:45 on December 19th, one of the tips saw Ed and Minnie Marin in the front seat of the vehicle, and a man in the back seat that was kind of hunched over the front seat looked like he was talking to him. At 11:30, the vehicle's seen with only one person driving the vehicle coming back into town, giving the detectives a pretty good idea when this murder occurred, between 10:45 a.m. and 11:30 a.m.
Then a man drove the car to the Yardbirds parking lot somewhere around noon, where he was actually seen walking away from the car.
Despite the hundreds of tips, detectives still can't identify the man that was seen in the Marin's car, and later in the Yardbirds parking lot.
It was like everybody's calling in saying, my ex-husband, my neighbor, it looks like this person, looks like that person. Detectives are running down leads all day and night long. The community is getting very upset. There's a lot of pressure on the sheriff's office, the investigators that are working on this case.
Unfortunately, there's just not a lot of new information that's coming in that leads to any really strong suspects.
With no clear suspect, the case stalls for the next 5 years.
This was a community before where people would leave their doors unlocked, their kids could play without having to worry about that. After this happened, everything changed because they didn't know who had committed these crimes.
Determined to get justice for beloved grandparents and town fixtures, Minnie and Ed Marin, Detective Nizer goes back to the drawing board, looking for new clues.
I remember there was a lead involving a white vehicle. We realized that there was a fellow named Frank Swan who was associated with a white vehicle.
Frank lived about a mile or two from the Yardbirds parking lot. He was related somehow by marriage to the family of the Marins. Frank, like a lot of these suspects, their attention on Frank Swan.
A tip comes in that Frank Swan had been bragging about how he had stolen the Marines' money and had killed them.
Now, when this tip came in, it gave the detectives, a new drive. It rejuvenated them.
Here's a case that was beyond cold. I mean, it was in deep freeze. And all of a sudden you have this crazy new lead that materializes out of nowhere. And we go from 0 to 1,000, like that.
After 5 years without a solid suspect into Minnie and Ed Marin's cold-blooded execution, investigators have learned that Chehalis local Frank Swan has bragged about committing the murders.
Frank met several of the criteria for being a suspect. Number one, he was associated with the white vehicle. Number two, he had married into the Morin family. Number three, he was known to us to be a bit of a doper.
When detectives looked into Frank Swan's criminal history, one of his booking photographs also gave a resemblance of the sketch that was provided from the witnesses on December 19th.
He was the best suspect we had at that time, and we didn't have enough to, we felt, go talk to him directly. We could go talk to him, and he'd just say, I didn't have anything to do with it, and that's the end of it.
They had to come up with a plan, some kind of an idea. How are they going to get this guy to talk? They come up with this plan of basically staging a whole mafia role-playing scene.
They concoct and then execute something that's commonly known as a Mr. Big sting. It basically is an elaborate production whereby the suspect is prepared to prove their street cred by confessing to their most serious crime they've ever committed, to earn the trust of some shadowy criminal organization, and in this case, it's his confessing to the murders of Ed and Minnie.
As part of the sting operation, Detective Nizer sets himself up as the criminal organization's pilot and Frank's primary contact.
We asked him if he wanted to make a little money just by showing up, delivering a package across town. He'd get $100. He was not to mess with the package in any way. Deliver the package, keep your mouth shut, and you'll make lots of money.
They set up a phone, a business, and everything else. They'd even go to car rental companies and get Cadillacs and fancy cars to put on the whole storyline of the mafia. It was very well developed and a very interesting out-of-the-box plan.
I told him, hey, I'll buy you lunch when you're done. So he came back to the airport and met with me, and I looked up, and there is a car, and inside that played a part of Mr. B. And I said, holy smokes, Frank, that's Mr. B. I said, well, come on up and meet them. Just relax and be yourself. Everything will be fine. And I said, okay, well, Mr. B, I'd like you to meet Frank Swan. And Frank Swan stuck his hand out to shake Mr. B's hand, and I realized Frank Swan was shaking. He was nervous. That's when I realized, oh yeah, he's in. He's in on the whole thing. I told Frank we could offer him a large sum of money to do a specific task for us. But you need to offer insurance. You tell us about something you've done that we will hold over your head so that you don't dare talk about us. You got anything like that?
Well, Frank comes up with a storyline how he killed two elderly people in Lewis County back in the 80s.
I told him, we'll meet with the insurance man, and you can give him your insurance.
Convinced they are about to break the case wide open, Detective Nizer, a trained pilot, flies Frank to Tacoma for the meeting with the insurance man.
I parked the plane, and Frank and I met the insurance man. I said, well, tell him, what kind of gun did you use? He wanted to be so bad that he started making stuff up, like telling us that it was a handgun when it wasn't, saying that he shot the morons in the parking lot, but they weren't shot there. And he flat did not have the information.
When Frank basically tells the detectives the complete opposite of how Ed and Marin were murdered, it was a huge blow to them. They got the wrong guy, and it's not him.
At first glance, it would seem implausible that somebody would admit to a double homicide that they didn't commit. But there's many examples of this. I mean, we have killers giving confessions of hundreds of homicides purely because they want the attention or the notoriety of doing so.
Inserting yourself is purely about seeking some sort of self-gratification, some sense of being famous, getting their 15 minutes of fame.
With the discovery that Frank Swan did not kill the Marines, detectives once again have no suspects. The only lead they have to go on is the mystery man seen with the Marines at 10:45 a.m. and walking away from their car in the parking lot at noon on December 19th, 1985, the day of the murders.
But then law enforcement received a tip from Chuck Burke that he had been at a party on December 11th of 1985 that both Rick and Greg Reif were at, and he overheard them planning the murder of the Marines. Now, law enforcement has some information that this is now not just a crime of chance or opportunity, but one that was actually premeditated. And premeditated murder is the most serious offense you can commit.
Changes the narrative entirely, and that creates a lot of new possibilities in terms of where to take the investigation.
Rick Reif, early 20s, Greg Reif, same thing. They were brothers, very close-knit brothers, very well known in the east end of Lewis County. They were known for fighting, crimes, abuse, domestic assaults.
They were also known as people who took illegal drugs. They wouldn't have had major money because as people who were members of the criminal underworld, you don't qualify for a good-paying job.
With both brothers fitting the profile of the Marin's killer, investigators shift their focus to Rick and Greg Reif.
Law enforcement receives a tip from Lonnie Scott, who knows Rick and Greg.
Back in December 1985, he is in the same vehicle with Rick and Greg Reif. These three ran around together, were using drugs. Rick's trying to come up with a plan for a robbery, make some money so they get some dope. They drive by Ed and Minnie Marin's house. And Lonnie makes a statement out loud. Hey, if you're looking for some money, those people right there have a lot of it.
And Lonnie Scott had purchased a shotgun and gave it to Rick. This was before December 19th of 1985. And he gave Rick the shotgun to let him cut it off, shorten it down, because Lonnie was a long-haul truck driver. And back in this period of time, they liked to have weapons to protect themselves in their rigs when they would drive.
Lonnie eventually finds out that Ed and Marin were taken from the house, murdered, and he's starting to put two and two together.
Worried his shotgun is connected to the Marin's murder, Lonnie threw it into a nearby lake in December 1985, days after receiving it back from Rick Reif.
Police brought in several divers, some of the most specialized equipment used by Navy SEALs to dive that water and look for that shotgun. But it is a proof needle in a haystack trying to find that shotgun in the water, so therefore the shotgun was never found.
We discovered two brothers made a major drug purchase of several $1,000s right after the murders. They would not have had that kind of money without committing some type of major crime. And the fact that they had thousands of dollars right after the Marins were murdered was very conspicuous.
While they continue to chase down more information on the Reif brothers, investigators hear about a promising new source.
One of the old leads said, "You guys should contact Robin Reif."
Robin Reif had been married to Rick Reif during the time frame that the Marins were murdered, and that she may have some information.
We ran a record check on her and found out that, lo and behold, she was to talk to you about a double homicide up here in Chehalis. And she said, "You mean the two old people?" That wasn't too abnormal, because when she lived here, everybody knew about the two old people who'd been murdered. But her next statement sent chills up and down my spine. She said, "Well, I just dropped them off at the store."
On December 18, 1985, her husband Rick wanted her to drop him off, him and his brother Greg Reif, and drive around while they do some sort of a robbery or burglary to a grocery store that was only a couple miles from the victim's residence.
She drops them off, and she's supposed to come back and pick them up later the same day. She does, but neither Rick nor Greg are there, and she doesn't have contact with them until the next day.
During that period, they could have very easily kidnapped and killed both Ed and Minnie and taken steps to cover their tracks. When you're talking about 14 hours, as is the case, sky's the limit.
It is a huge break in the case. This blows the case wide open.
6 years after the brutal kidnapping and double homicide of Minnie and Ed Marin, investigators finally have two suspects, brothers Rick and Greg Reif.
Robin Reif says she had dropped off her husband Rick Reif at the store, along with his little brother Greg Reif, the night before Ed and Minnie Morin were kidnapped.
And the next day, December 19th, she gets a phone call from Greg Reif, giving her directions where to come pick him up. Then Greg has her drive to where Rick was on his logging road.
In terms of investigative timelines, now we're talking about the possibility that they were in there for hours, even overnight, the night before, and held them hostage.
This is a planned, premeditated crime that's financially driven. This tells us we have some very goal-oriented, callous individuals if they're willing to do this for money.
The detectives knew this is the tip, this is everything we've been waiting for. But they want some more details before they make an arrest.
Robin, her credibility was always in question for a number of reasons. She had a criminal She had extreme drug use, and there was potentially some bad blood between her and Rick and Gray. And so there was always that issue there of, is she telling us the truth?
Needing to question the Reif brothers as soon as possible, investigators search for them, discovering they've moved to King Salmon, Alaska.
When detectives go and contact Rick Reif, they get him to go to a local Alaska police station. He is as cold as ice. He's pretty abrupt, very strong-minded, and he's not really saying anything.
They specifically ask him and Rick won't answer the question. He stonewalls law enforcement.
With Rick refusing to open up, detectives turn their attention to his brother Greg.
Now, everybody's talked about Greg was the younger brother, a little bit softer, totally different than Rick, but still a violent man. So they're interviewing Greg, and he's saying things like, I don't know, I used a lot of drugs back then. At some point, Greg's breaking down a little bit.
Greg is asked where he was on December 19th, 1985, and his response is he doesn't know. He doesn't know if he's involved, and he needs time to think. And so law enforcement actually feels that they are getting to Greg because he is feeling some guilt.
With no forensic evidence tying the Reif brothers to the crime, investigators focus on trying to get them to confess.
Rick had taken a polygraph on a separate, unrelated sex crime, and he passed it. So he had some history of taking a polygraph that he felt he could pass another one.
Rick volunteers to take a polygraph examination, which is administered, and he fails. Greg is asked if he would be willing to take one, and he agrees, and he fails it as well.
Despite failing the polygraph test, police don't have enough evidence connecting the Reif brothers to the Marin's murder, and are forced to let them go.
We've got Robin, who would testify for the prosecution, but she wasn't there when the murders actually occurred. We only have a 50-50 chance of them being convicted, and if we take a shot now and we lose, we can't try them again. We're done for forever.
As law enforcement is building their case, they receive some devastating news. Robin has passed away. So now law enforcement is missing their most material witness, and so the case comes to a standstill after that.
We now had nothing. I lost a lot of hope. I figured this case was almost as dead as the Morons were.
After a 19-year investigation, the execution-style double homicide of Minnie and Ed Marin remains unsolved. But in 2004, the case is revitalized when a young investigator with the Lewis County Sheriff's Office, Detective Bruce Kimsey, decides to look into the murders.
1985 was about 10 years old. Ed and Minnie Marin were treasures of the community. So after getting out of the Army, I was hired at the Sheriff's Office at 22 years old. So I write out my goals, and one of them is I want to solve the murder of Ed and Minnie Marin. There were hundreds of statements, and so I had to go back and read all these statements and figure out who's alive still, who's not alive, and who's a pertinent witness.
At the time of the original investigation, people may have been reluctant, fearful, but 20 years later, that's where things that used to worry them and people who used to scare them no longer do.
Then Detective Kimsey gets an unexpected visit from one of the original tipsters, who saw the Marins in their car the day of the murder.
Jason Shriver comes to law enforcement and he says he saw Rick and Greg in the Marin's car when his mother was driving him to the dentist. On December 19th, he saw Ed driving. He saw Rick Reif in the front passenger seat. He saw Minnie sitting behind Ed, and he saw Greg Reif in the right rear passenger seat. And he actually waved to Greg, and Greg kind of gave him a little head nod. And so he was 17 then, and he was in his 30s when he finally came forward to report what he knew.
I was amazed. Even Robin could not place the Wright brothers in Ed and Minnie's car with them. My hopes that we'd be able to prosecute this case took a jump about 5 feet up in the air.
A couple of days after the 19th, Jason is downtown and Rick and Greg show up and they threaten him and basically say, if you tell anybody what you saw, then we're going to go after your family. So Jason was afraid for his family's life, but his mom passed away from cancer, so he doesn't have to worry about his mom being harmed by the Wright brothers. So that's why he eventually comes forward.
As Detective Kimsey continued to put this together, other people began coming forward. They hadn't spoken up when we were initially investigating the case, so I was encouraged that, hey, we might get this case after all.
The timeline was extremely important for us because we had Jason, who obviously could place the Wright brothers with the Marins, but then we had individuals that were able to identify the Marin vehicle all throughout Lewis County as it was driving up to the bank and then from the bank out to the logging road. And without that, I don't know if we would have been able to explain everything as well as we were able to do.
After 19 years, police finally have enough evidence to place the Wright brothers with the Marines during the window of their murders.
When the prosecutor's office made a decision to file charges against the Reif brothers, we received word that Greg Reif had passed away. So everything turned on to Rick Reif at that point in time.
We get up to King Salmon, Alaska. We are going to Rick Reif's house. So we go there, introduce ourselves to Rick Reif. We must have sat there for about an hour. We're asking him a lot of questions. And he's doing a lot of denial, same thing he did with the detectives back in the early 90s. It doesn't matter at this time because there's enough evidence against him to go to trial. Eventually, a statement's made to Rick, stand up, you're under arrest. And the only thing he says back to us is, well, we need my medications.
Detectives are now able to piece together Ed and Minnie Marin's final 24 hours.
Believes is a robbery to a local grocery store. However, instead of robbing the grocery store, Rick and Greg Reif went to Ed and Minnie Marin's house, gaining entry and holding them hostage. The next morning, Rick and Greg made Ed Marin call the bank between 9:30 and 10 a.m. to withdraw funds from their bank account. The Wright brothers forced Ed and Minnie Marin into their own car, made them drive to the bank to withdraw funds at 10:30 a.m. When Ed goes inside the bank, the brothers are staying with Minnie in the car, holding her hostage.
Wonder if I could bring them to live. I could bring my lover. And baby, you make me wait. Now here I go, going back on the road. Now here I go, going back on the road. Now here I go, going back on the road. Now here I go, going back on the road. When you back there again, play the music back there again. I saw the looking out of the window. Wonder if I could bring them down. If I could bring my love now, baby, you made.
Shorty, if you really wanna go, baby, then you gotta take me the mess. I tried to soak in all the years and take it all in, but I come up for a breath and cry. I gave my drama, gave my simple, gave my friends a helping hand. I bet you know that they are dead. I wish I could tell you this. The more we talk, the talk is not a tongue. The more we talk, the talk is not a tongue. I did not come this far for any stronger. All of a sudden there was nothing left. Well, last night a doctor thought you were lying. I never meant to keep you alive. There might be stuff we said that sound dumb to you, but to get a red wine and take it with a lead, I bet you know that they are dead. I wish I could tell you this. The more we talk, the talk the tall